Hey guys, welcome out to Revolution this morning. Um, we're going to continue our discussion on the Textus Receptus and what the Textus Receptus is. And so, if you want to join us, it's quite easy. So I'm going to put up a link on the screen here. If you want to join us in um, with your cam, if you go to this link here, you can become another bobbing head up here, and we can discuss things. And so it's quite easy if you just type that in into your browser and then just follow the prompts. It'll bring you to me, and then I can add you. And the only thing I just request is that maybe you use headphones if you do have headphones. If not, we'll see if it works without it. Um, and also that you don't have a crunchy line. Sometimes we've had guests on who have a crunchy line, and it makes it almost impossible to rewatch those type of discussions. And yeah, that's about all the rules I have. Whether you're for the TR or against the TR, we can have a discussion. Obviously, we are promoting the Textus Receptus. Um, this is part of the Textus Receptus Academy that is on Facebook. And so the Textus Receptus Academy has been around for a few years now. I still run another group called Textus Receptus, and there used to be quite a lot of activity on that page up until maybe about 5 years ago, and we've got up to about 7,000 people on there, and it used to be quite a hub of activity. And then the popularity sort of jumped around to Textus Receptus Bibles. I think even Robert Truelove was running a page there for a while. And then when Robert Truelove pulled the pin on his page, I thought, well, I might as well start up another fresh page. And we've got about 1,100 people who have joined that page. And it's quite interesting. We have some good discussions. We have a few people on there who troll and, put up useless stuff. And so I do try to keep on top of that. But this is an overflow of that. And so, who am I? My name's Nick Sayers. I'm from the east coast of Australia, just about 9 hours drive north of Sydney. And I've been interested in Textus Receptus issues for many years. And I've written a book. The only book that I've actually published is on Revelation chapter 16, verse 5. And it's sort of debunking the claims of James White in his King James only controversy. James White, most people involved with the issues of text criticism know. I'll just put the screen on large screen there. Most people know about James White and about his book. Many times, the testimony of people in the critical text camp is that they were a King James onlyist, even though many times you'll talk to these guys about specific things about onlyism or TR onlyism, and many times they don't know it. But they would have grabbed this book and got converted to the critical text position. And I find this book is so filled with error. It would be great to do a whole series on this and for people to jump in and actually work through this book, because I guess a lot of colleges work through this book. And the first time I saw this book was in the 1990s. I was in Papua New Guinea. We were doing missionary work up there, and a pastor who I know, he had the first edition, and so I started reading through it, and it was like picking up a book. Sometimes you pick up a book and you don't know the author or anything. It might be like Benny Hinn or a Kenneth Copeland sort of thing. There's just stuff in it that just didn't gel with my spirit. I'm like, that just doesn't sit right. Um, and the pastor was like, every time you come here, you're going into that book. And I kept looking at it and thinking about it. And it wasn't long after that that I actually started looking up things to do with, or at that time, the internet wasn't really around. And so I started looking for printed material. So I found the Trinitarian Bible Society material. And actually, the next time I went to New Guinea on another mission trip, I brought it up for that pastor, and he read through it, and he said it was very interesting. And um, and since then, I guess I've just heard the name James White, constantly brought up. And there's a lot of good argumentation against James White there on the internet. There hasn't really been anything officially published. I'd love to do that. Um, but what I found was James White just constantly, like as a trump card, brought up Revelation 16:5, Revelation 16:5, and so it was good to nail him on that. He doesn't bring it up much anymore. I don't think he's brought it up really at all since I've nailed him on it and pointed out the errors in his book. But it'd be good to move on to other um, topics that people feel are um, that people feel are trump cards against the Textus Receptus position. We were talking last week about the last 6 verses of Revelation. We talked about the Comma Johanneum. But I guess in a way, I like to focus on those issues that no one is focusing on because, or not that no one's focusing on, but no one has really found an adequate answer for. And that's why with Revelation 16:5, there wasn't really much material to work with. And when I came to some of the conclusions I did, I was like, I'm alone here with this. I feel like I'm pioneering new ground here. But the people that I really found had done the homework on this were the reformers, and it was actually Theodore Beza with his annotations. And so I went through his annotations, and I found that uh, what he said was spot on. And and so I'm sure there are other issues. There's Revelation 17:8, which is a similar verse. I think it's the beast which uh, is and what or was and is not and yet is, or something like that. There are other places where James White and the crew, Dan Wallace and others, they claim that there are Greek words that appear in the New Testament that have never been seen anywhere else. And sometimes I've done studies on these, and you sort of find an answer. It's quite easy, but these things just continually get parroted by the new generation of apologists coming through. And so someone like James White, look, he's well versed in rhetoric. He's a good speaker. If you're on the high school debate team, you would want James White on your team. He's that sort of guy. But at the end of the day, he is what I find with modern day apologists. They're trying to um, they're trying to ignite the faith of people, or they're trying ignite's probably not the best word. They're trying to um, continue or help people maintain their faith from when they leave their parents' house and they go into the big wide world. And a lot of people are losing faith. They read Bart Ehrman and they lose their faith, or they encounter people who have these arguments against Christianity and atheists and the rest. And these modern day apologists, they have many times they have good argumentation, but the problem is they're not leading them to a text that is stable. The text that usually they're pointing to is a critical text, which can morph and change into anything. Like when James White did a debate with um, Jeff Riddle, uh, I think it was about this time last year, actually, or it might have been a bit longer. Um, when when they did that debate, James White admitted that if they'd found manuscripts if they found, another Sinaiticus or a Vaticanus sort of manuscript, that he would gladly change his views, that he would, add or subtract or whatever it took to amend the text that he's using to that manuscript. And I guess this has been, happening for quite a while. These guys are reconstructing their text, and the papyri didn't really change much. If anything, it might um, place a tiny little bit of weight behind Vaticanus or Sinaiticus because sometimes they're standing alone, or they've got only a handful of other um, manuscripts that have the same variant. So sometimes the papyrus might have another. It might just be a variant count. But really, the papyrus didn't change the text that much, and that's been admitted by the critical text side. But it's really strange when you listen to someone like James White. He would say that the last 12 verses of Mark are Gnostic and strange and weird. And so, if you listen to Jeff Riddle's recent podcast, there was a panel discussion which had Elijah Hickson and Dan Wallace and Bill Mounts. And so Bill Mounts, he said that the woman caught in adultery is just this strange, weird story just thrown in the midst of of a of of a text that really has a lot of clarity. So if you're reading through and you take the woman caught in adultery out, it makes a lot more sense. Where I don't see that. I, if you don't know that there's doubt placed over those verses, if you just go through and read it, you'll be none the wiser, in a sense where you won't even know that people doubt those verses. But he says they're weird, they're strange, and many people have said that they're not part of Scripture. Like Dan Wallace, he'll say it's my favorite story in the Bible that's not Scripture. And so that opens up the door to the Bible that you hold in your hand. And I'm not just saying King James or any Bible. If you hold it in your hand, it has Gnostic, like 12 verses. James White saying in Gnostic readings. It has, the woman caught in adultery. It has these 12 verses which shouldn't be in the Bible. Peter Gurry said they're apocryphal readings, and so it's quite strange. And so you imagine you're an apologist and you're trying to help someone's faith. You're trying to, the next generation of young people coming through college, you're trying to encourage them and you're trying to guide them in the scriptures. And you're saying, these verses shouldn't really be in the Bible. And so, it's like, well, why are they in the ESV? Why are they in the NIV then? Most of the time, they have footnotes and things like that, but they don't take them out because they don't want to upset people. And someone like James White or Stephen Boyce, they've said, well, we should just upset people. That should, and I agree. The thing is, if they start taking those huge chunks out, English speaking people go, hang on, there's actually quite a lot of difference between the King James and this other one. They go to, imagine someone using the ESV or a newer update of the ESV, and they go out evangelizing and someone's talking about, you know, the Great Commission or something like that, and they grab their Bible and they go to Mark, and it's just not there. Go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. It's gone. Those 12 verses are gone. And so the thing is, many times there's about 250 verses of scripture that have doubt placed on them because of the critical text. And many times wholesale scriptures are just deleted. But there are many places where it's just the end of a sentence is gone, a word is changed. It's changed from I to we, or we to I. The person is changed. There's a lot of strange readings in the critical text as well. And so, unfortunately, this generation of apologists is pointing people to a Bible that I would consider as messy or almost on par with the New World Translation. And so I know that people lose their mind when when I say that. I actually had a guy. I do a fair bit of street preaching, evangelism, and things like that. And I had a guy. He's a very nice guy, and we were getting along up until this point. And he said, Nick, I see your ministry, I see what you're doing, and I really want to learn from you about the Bible issue. I've heard that you prefer the King James Bible. Um, and so I just want to know what the go is with the modern Bibles. Like, can you be saved reading a modern Bible? I'm like, well, you can be saved just, falling off a horse. It doesn't, you know, I know there's people like Stephen Anderson who are like, if you just sort of mechanically quote the King James to someone, that's going to produce the faith. Um, sometimes a track, a track will have a story in it, and that will guide someone to a point where they believe, in Jesus died on the cross, there's a resurrection, and they can put their faith in God. Like, I would prefer that someone read, Scripture, obviously, but I know of people who have become born again and they haven't got a Bible. They've just prayed. They've just said, God, help me, whatever. And they've had an experience with God where Jesus has come and to abide in them. And then from there, they've gone, I really feel this urge to read the Bible. And so um, I think the whole thing of, do we have to read the Bible to be saved? That I just don't really gel with that. I think it's good. We should be out there when we're preaching. We should be having as much scripture as possible. But at the end of the day, when there are many people out there um, who put their faith and their trust in these modern Bibles that have so many mistakes in them, so many errors in them, and so many concepts that that destroy your faith. So before I was a born again Christian, so this is a really good example. And so I was an atheist, okay? So I didn't believe in God. Well, I guess I would be more of an agnostic. I didn't understand Christianity well. I hadn't really gone through and looked at it all and weighed it all up. I was just like, we come from monkeys. Who cares? There's no God. Christians are stupid. Why would we bother with Christianity? And why would we bother with Hinduism or any of these other things? They're stupid. They're all pretty much the same. They're all religions. Most people I knew were saying, well, when you die, you just go, into the ground 6 feet under, and that's about it. So I was given an NIV Bible. It was one of these ones that was sort of like the Olympics Games Bible. So this is back in the 90s. And I was given that Bible and NIV, so it's just a New Testament. So I thought, well, I'll read it. I'd read a few other books. I'd read the book of Dianetics, Scientology. I'd read books on Hinduism. And I thought, well, I'll read this book. So I started going through. And when I got to Matthew chapter 5, I started to realize it had these footnotes. And some of the footnotes were saying, we're not sure whether this verse is in the text. And I just thought, these guys, this is their text. They're not even sure if it should read that or not. I thought, how dumb, how stupid. And so I got to Matthew 5 and I got the NIV Bible and I just flung it into the corner of the room. I just thought, this is just the most stupidest thing. Well, why would you have a book where you're not sure of the readings? These other books that I'd been reading, they were pretty certain about what they were saying. They were saying it authoritatively. And so I can just imagine, and I guess I can sympathize with people when they pick up these new Bibles and they've got all these footnotes of, the majority text says, NU says this, United Bible Society, Nestle Aland says this, and these 12 verses should be taken out. The best manuscripts say that, and it's like, guys, get it together, get it together. And this is one of the things where I came into Christianity after having that experience. So it was about a year and a half later that I became a Christian. And I didn't really think about that experience until I started talking to people about, the Textus Receptus and King James Bible and things like that. And I guess I realized that I'd been a victim of, I'm not playing the victim card here, but I'd been a victim of the academy and of their footnoted, heavily footnoted Bible, doubt producing footnotes. If someone, when someone says to me, oh, doubt producing footnotes, that's a load of rubbish. That's just, King James people would say that. Well, I was just a total bare bones, didn't care which religion. I was just reading it. And my logic at the time just went, this is ridiculous. How can they say that verse shouldn't be in there? That's crazy. How can they say that? Or the best manuscripts have this, or however they worded it. I can't really remember, but I knew it was. I got to that point, and I just went, That is ridiculous. And so, um, anyway, I'm just sort of doing an introduction. If you want to join, jump onto StreamYard. We're going to start talking about the Textus Receptus in a minute. So last week we started talking about a few different points in time. So we talked a little bit about the fall of Constantinople. It's a very interesting subject. If you don't know about these things and you want to get into TR issues, it's very helpful if you understand about, the printing press, the fall of Constantinople. People like Lorenzo Valla, if you do a little bit of study, even just a cursory look at these things, it will help you with your understanding, because many people sort of fail to connect the dots, and even people in the academy in Munster, someone like Mark Ward will continually bring up, oh, there's differences between TR editions. Well, that's because a new technology had come along. Up until then, things were handwritten, and we expect anytime there's a handwritten document, there's going to be errors in that document. And so, um, you know, most people have heard examples of a classroom where they would write something down, pass it on to the next person, and they will copy it out, pass it on to the next person. And by the time it gets around the room, there's errors in that text. And so we understand that errors can creep into the manuscripts, and that's just a normal thing that happens. Any tradition that has manuscripts, they have to do a certain amount of textual criticism. Now, when I say textual criticism, there's a difference between what happened in the Reformation with that type of textual criticism and modern day textual criticism influenced by the Enlightenment, or full reconstructionist textual criticism, because um, many people today are trying to recreate the Bible. And so they believe that the Textus Receptus is corrupt. They believe it's filled with errors. It's can't be trusted, and so they're trying to go back to, before the fourth century sort of thing. And they're going back to manuscripts like Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, even though these two are totally inconsistent with each other. Dean John William Burgon said it's easier to find a mistake than it is to find a correct readings. Every second verse, he said, has these type of errors. And so we're looking at people who are favoring manuscripts that were rejected. And so obviously, Sinaiticus, they claim that it was found by Tischendorf, and this has become the mainstream narrative with Sinaiticus. There is a group of people who are saying, or placing doubt over Sinaiticus, saying it's a modern day forgery. Where do I sit with that? Well, I just want that manuscript to be tested scientifically, and then we can either put that to rest, that story, as a conspiracy theory, or we can go, yes, there are issues there that need to be addressed. And so it's amazing when you listen to someone like Bart Ehrman. He will put doubt on every manuscript in history. He will say, oh, Second Peter, First Peter, how could Peter write anything? He was just a dumb fisherman, sort of thing. That's basically sums up, I think, a whole chapter I was looking at the other day in Forged. But he won't put doubt on Sinaiticus. It's just amazing. It's like he will put doubt on everything else, but when it comes to these things that make him the king of the castle in the academy, he won't even look into it. And so it's quite amazing. And so Vaticanus was rejected. Erasmus, he looked at Vaticanus. Now, whether he had actually seen it, I mean, people are quite adamant in the academy saying that he never saw Vaticanus. I mean, he lived with Bombasius for 7 months. Bombasius, he was the curator for the Vatican Library, eventually became the curator. And so Erasmus and Bombasius, they wrote to each other. There was another guy called Sepultiva, and they also corresponded, Erasmus and himself. And so they talked about Vaticanus. So he had, whether he saw it or not, we don't know. But at the end of the day, he could have seen Vaticanus. Just because history is silent on something doesn't automatically mean it goes to your side. You've got to weigh up the possibility that he could have gone and seen Vaticanus many times. And I've often said that the the claim that he didn't see Vaticanus, it just seems to go against everything Erasmus did. Like Erasmus, he went around Europe, scouring the libraries of Europe for different variants and different versions, and looking at the Latin. He was working on a Latin edition. He was looking at the Greek, so he's going through them. He's looking at the early church writings, as if he didn't go to the Vatican library. He was a Roman Catholic, and so um, I think that he was of the school of Roman Catholics that, I guess, Luther had this same spirit. He wanted to remain in the church and reform it, but Luther got booted. He was a little bit too loudmouthed, I guess, for the likings of the Roman Catholics of those days. But there were people like Thomas More and people like Erasmus and others who they would look at the extremes of the Roman Catholic Church, and they were trying to, guide the church in a certain way, and they were trying to reform that Roman Catholic Church, where uh, the the true reformers left. So Erasmus is an interesting character. There's a good article by David Cloud, and so David Cloud says that Erasmus he was multifaceted. He was a very interesting guy. There were certain areas he did compromise in. There were certain areas where he did, turn around and say, "Hey, the veneration of Mary is just a normal thing in the Roman Catholic Church." And yes, there were certain things that he was defending in Catholicism, but then there was a lot of things he was attacking in Catholicism. And so, but the saying is still there that Erasmus, he laid the egg and Luther hatched it. And I think we can just see through history that seems to be exactly what happened. And so Luther, he just translated the work of Erasmus. So did Tyndale. Now, one of the things is it's because, Erasmus never left the Roman Catholic Church. Now, one thing I point to people is that William Tyndale, he actually was a Roman Catholic priest up until he was defrocked, when he was strangled and burnt at the stake. So he was still classified as a Roman Catholic, but you wouldn't say, "Oh, Tyndale, the Roman Catholic." He was probably the the main driving force behind the Reformation in England. And so when you look at Erasmus, he was pointing things, let's get back to the scriptures, guys, but he still had a lot of Roman Catholic baggage. And he was an intellectual. He seemed to have the gift of the gab and could talk his way out of certain situations. It seemed like there was a whole bunch of academic guys who he could associate with and sort of get along with and be in their circles and not get the criticism that Luther would get. And I guess he had his debates with Luther, so it sort of looked like he was on one side and all the rest of it. But I'm just going to throw some of these comments up. So we've got Stephen Hayes, greetings from Idaho. Glad you're streaming again this week. Great topic. And so just to let you know, I'm actually heading down to Melbourne, Victoria next weekend. And so I mightn't be able to do a live one. I'll let you guys know if I can or not. I might have to change the time if I do to maybe a bit of a early morning or a night session, but I'll just see how I go. So thanks, Stephen. So we got Word Magazine. So I'm assuming that's Jeff Riddle. Greetings from Virginia, USA. Nice to see you, Jeff. I really enjoy your Word Magazine. I guess probably for maybe 2.5 years, I've listened to every single one of them. I really enjoy them. I've been going back through the archives, and there's a lot of information there. It's a wealth of information, actually, and it's a place where I guide people that if they want to know more about these issues or they want to have answers to um, issues on the text, Textus Receptus, King James Bible, go to Word Magazine, go to Stylos, just type in jeffriddle.net and you'll get there. And so, yeah, I really enjoy I enjoy the way that you point out some of the inconsistencies, like in the last video with Bill Mounts. He's saying that the reading of the woman caught in adultery was this really weird reading, but then he turns around and says, "Oh, it's typical of what Jesus would have said." And sometimes it's I actually laugh out loud. That people write LOL when they don't laugh out loud. I actually laugh because it's like it's so blatant and in your face. Here are these guys just saying, you know, here's this weird Gnostic, James White's a Gnostic story, but he'll accept it if they find a manuscript to back that up. Something with the weight of Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. He'll accept the last 12 verses of Mark. So he'll put not what he considers now as Gnostic readings in the Bible if they find a manuscript. And so it just shows you the inconsistency of these guys. And I really appreciate the work you do there. Just another announcement, I'm going to be doing a debate. So this weekend I'm going to Melbourne, Victoria, and then the week after I'm going to be doing a debate. I think it's on Tuesday, so I assume it's going to be in the evening. And that is against a guy called CJ Cox. And so there's a YouTube. I should really have this information in front of me, but I don't. There's a YouTube channel called Standing for Truth. It's run by Donnie. And oftentimes he has like Kent Hovind on there. And so many times they're talking about King James issues and all the rest of it. Now, I've listened to a fair bit of Kent Hovind stuff back in the day. When he talks about King James issues, usually he's talking from a Ripplinger style, Sam Gipp style. And so I guess Donnie wanted something a little bit more, or away from that type of thing. And I guess too, the thing is, Ken Hovind, he's focusing on his creation ministries, regardless of what you think about it. I know some people are like, I don't like him. He's, I don't want to know about Ken Hovind, whatever. And his third wife or whatever, and it's like, I really actually appreciate the work that Ken Hovind had done when he went to prison. I believe it was vindictive and a type of persecution, which was interesting. Coming from an Australian perspective, I'd sort of been looking at constitutional issues and got into Ron Paul, the freedom movement, and I was like, wow, these guys really know what they're on about. And to see Ken Hovind get thrown into jail, over what he did. And then, sort of released, and some of the characters who were involved in that. I guess I'm not defending him. I don't know that much about it, but at the end of the day, I guess Donnie just sort of saw that, some of the things that Kent Hovind was saying weren't up to speed. So he's sort of got me on board with his channel, and he wants me to be sort of like a spokesperson for the King James Textus Receptus position. And so I'm really glad. And so he's setting up debates. He set up the one with Rob Rowe, which was a good debate. I really felt that was good. So I'm just going to follow some of these. I'll just go down to Jeff Riddle because he sort of continued here. I'd love to have you on Word Magazine to do a guest interview sometime to describe your ministry. I'll send you an email. So that'll be great. And so from the outset, I'm just letting you guys know that I'm not a Calvinist. And so I guess, Jeff Riddle has, James Snap on there and other people who aren't Calvinists. And so just from the outset, I know James White announced that I was a Calvinist years ago, and I don't know where he got that from. But usually I don't bring these issues up because I sort of feel that this issue with the text, to me, it's almost like mathematics. It's like 1 + 1 = 2. It's that simple. The answer is this. I mean, anyone with a little bit of logic can see that, if you're reading a book that has a God who can't lie, a God who won't contradict himself, a God who is almighty, all powerful, all knowing. And if he's going to write a book and he says that it's inspired by himself, that it's preserved, he's going to preserve it throughout time. anyone with half a brain can go, well, obviously there's not going to be mistakes in it, and so the conclusions of people like Metzger, that even the originals have mistakes, and to me it's just strange. And um, but I guess, we come from all different theological backgrounds, and sometimes that can be locational as well. Here in Australia, most Baptist churches are Hillsong churches. You go to a Baptist church here, you'll probably get prayed for to get slain in the spirit, sort of thing. That's how Baptists are viewed here. You do get fundamentalist Baptists, and you've had a few Stephen Anderson plants and things like that. You've got a few guys from the Dean Burgon Society. There's one guy here, but usually they've got 10, 15 people going to their church, sort of thing. Any sort of Baptist church with a bit of weight is usually many times they're charismatic. And so there's just a difference. If you go to Europe, it just depends. You can go to churches that would call themselves Reformed and Anglican and all the rest of it, and they're way different to an Episcopalian church or Reformed church or whatever in the United States. And so, but I think the good thing is we find agreement on this issue, and so that's where I'd sort of try to keep it. Um, and I try not to get too much into the weeds of, he said, she said, sort of thing. And like, say last week we had Stephen Avery on. Now I know that Stephen Avery is a controversial figure, in a sense where people who um, have reformed theology see that he doesn't adhere to some of the creeds, and this affects the understanding of the Trinity that he has. And so I've talked to Stephen a lot about this issue. And I'm like, okay, so what's your view on the Trinity? He's like, well, I believe that there are three. There are three there, and that they're not the same. The Father isn't the Son isn't the Father, and he said, I just can't bind myself to the creeds that people have, and so it's interesting, and so he affirms the deity of Christ and things like that, and he doesn't think the Father is the Son and the Son is the Father, but he believes they're both God, and so they're both Jehovah. And I guess in a way, I need to know a little bit more about that as well, because we were getting deep into this type of discussion on the Textus Receptus Academy, and I think it was Luke Carpenter. He pointed out and said, "Well, Stephen's a oneness Pentecostal modalist," and so Stephen said, "Look, I don't believe in modalism. I have that background, but I don't believe in it." But it's sort of like he's seen as being deceptive by saying that. People are like, no, he's a liar. And so, I've gone through it with him. Josh Gibbs has gone through it with him. And in the end, I'm like, he just doesn't really like the term the Trinity. And so it was interesting. One of the main, or the main guy behind the New American Standard Bible, what's his last name? Andrews. I contacted him and I was talking to him about how much Greek he knows. He said he's not fluent in Greek and all the rest of it. But then I noticed he was doing a debate against Matt Slick on using the term Trinity, and he doesn't use the term Trinity. He said, why should I use a term that Paul never used in his whole entire ministry? He said, I believe in Trinitarian concepts, but I don't use the term Trinity. And was like, okay, well, so you got some interesting argumentation there. I don't mind the term Trinity. I use it all the time. I think it just sums up things. But I guess for some people it can be an issue, and it's not an issue for me though. And so, I guess in a way, I'm just sort of having a caveat here that I've got people who are going to come on this program, probably people like James Snap. I think he actually believes in baptismal regeneration, and obviously I don't agree with James Snap, with his conclusions on many things. And we actually want to have critical text guys on here. I'd love to have people like Dan Wallace and some of the guys, even Tommy Wasserman, and people who I've had debates with on Facebook chat groups, and Elijah Hickson, Peter Gary. It'd be great to have those guys on, and I have the opportunity to do debates on this forum. Now, with some of you guys who are here, I'd really highly recommend that you get this program called StreamYard. And so it's so easy, like all these things like having Word Magazine here with the quotation and the rest of it. It's so easy, and it would be a very easy platform to have debates on, but also to do live videos on. And so I know some like say uh, Jeff does the he edits his, but most of it is just him just sitting there speaking. But this is quite good, and you can actually line up a whole bunch of scriptures that you can put down the bottom there. And so I found this has just sort of liberated all that I've been trying to do. And you can stream it live on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. So I've got 3 places that I can stream it live to. And so yeah, so it's really cool. So I'm going to keep going through the Word Magazine stuff. Just because, actually, I'll go through some of these other ones. So Stephen Hayes, he said earlier, there is extant correspondence between Erasmus and Bombasius discussing readings in Vaticanus. How was Erasmus aware of these readings if he had not seen it? Exactly. I guess Bombasius could have turned around and said, "Hey, look, we've got this manuscript here, that you didn't see. Here's some readings in it." But at the end of the day, it makes more sense to me that Erasmus saw it. It just seems like one of those things that they love to say. Oh, Erasmus didn't even look at it. How could have he had known what that manuscript was like? He didn't even see it. And it's like, well, how do you know that? It's just another fact about Erasmus from silence. They don't know whether he saw it. No one knows whether he saw it or not. And so we can assume either way. We can assume that he saw it, or we can assume that he didn't. But it's so dogmatically, um, um, with pulpit thumping assurance that it's so dogmatically asserted that he didn't see it. It's almost like, well, why wouldn't he? Imagine him going down to the Vatican Library that day, and he's walking in, and it's like there's this green gas there that he can't get through. He's like coughing, like, there's gas. I can't go and see these manuscripts. Of course he would have gone in there and seen the manuscripts. But you know what else is damning against Vaticanus? And I heard this the other week, and I thought that's gold. The Complutensian polyglot translators, they had open access to the Vatican manuscripts. They had open access to, the Pope just said, just use whatever you want. And so they borrowed manuscripts. They grabbed a whole bunch of them, and they didn't use Vaticanus. They saw no value in it whatsoever. How's that? And so the cream of the crop of scholarship in the Roman Catholic Church of that day thought that Vaticanus was just rubbish. And so Erasmus, he eventually in his 1535, he said he thought it was a back translation from the Latin. So it's interesting that accusation has been turned on its head, and that's actually, coming against Erasmus now, that he back translated from the Latin, which is a load of rubbish. But yeah, great point there, Stephen. Really, really good point. And so Helge Evanson says, greetings from Norway. Yeah, I enjoyed your little chat you had there the other week. It'll be great to promote TR Bibles that are in Norwegian and the history of the Bible. I'm sure there's a rich history, like with most of the European countries, of TR editions in the Norwegian language. That would be great. So Stephen Hayes said, I try not to miss Nick Sayers or Word Magazine when he's doing textual studies. They are my 2 favorites. Oh, that's great. It's really good to hear that. And I try to keep these or keep what I'm saying on par with Jeff Riddle's material. Now, Jeff's obviously an academic. I'm just a layman, and I sort of like that title, because then if I make a mistake, I'm just like, well, I'm a layman. Sort of lets me get away with a few things. But I think we're on the same page with a lot of these things. And like I said before, to me, it's just mathematics. It's like we're just looking at the same thing going, well, it seems like a bias that they have against the last 12 verses of Mark, when everyone's, 99.9% of the manuscripts, have it, and everyone said it should be in there, and then there's only just a small, tiny percentage of people who want it out. It just seems like there's a bias against that. And so I'm sure Jeff just looks at it the same way and can see that. And the more we study things and the more we look into it, the more convinced we become. But I think too, there is that issue of we do hear the voice of the shepherd. We recognize, when we look at things, when I grab an ESV, or I had a New English Bible, an old one, and I'd read through it, and it was so bad. I was like, oh, maybe I should just donate it to the op shop. And I actually just threw it in the bin. I was just like, this is just garbage. This is, I mean, I think the ESV and these other Bibles are bad enough, but this was just absolute trash. And something like the Good News Bible, you go through that and you're left with a headache. Now, when I go to places like Papua New Guinea, I've been there 13 times, and it was quite interesting because I was listening to Jeff Riddle. He was the other day talking about Peter Gurry had this example about, should a Papua New Guinean tribe have, a perfect Bible and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, yeah, he's making this example, but he has no idea. There is the King James New Palette Testament, and that is the King James Bible in Pidgin. And so you can get the equivalent to the King James Bible in their language. And people who are usually serious in their studies, they haven't been influenced by the United Bible Societies and these other groups, they read that. And it's been, there's been like 100,000 printings or whatever. And so the people of Papua New Guinea are interested in having a proper Bible. It's just interesting that Peter Gurry has this example, well, Papua New Guinea tribes, do they need the proper Bible? Yes, we want to give them the best that we have, but their best is, I've actually been there with one of the main, I think he was the main translator for the Pidgin Bible. He worked for the United Bible Society, and I was sharing a room with him in a missionary home. And I didn't let on what I did. I'm going up there, I'm street preaching, evangelizing. We're going to hospitals, visiting people. And it's a rough place. Port Moresby is one of the roughest. It's like going to Haiti, or something like that. It's a rough place, and you can you can get in a lot of trouble very quickly there. Just walking around and things. But we would just trust God and go preaching and have a great time. They seem to respect the people who do that. When you go there and you're open and you're street preaching, that there seems to be this protection that people will look at you and they know that you're not there trying to rip them off, or you're from a mining company or whatever. You're trying to help the people. And so I didn't let on that I'm, running a website, Textus Receptus. I just wanted to hear, because I knew he was so hostile already against anything to do with the King James Textus Receptus. He was already saying this sort of stuff coming out of his mouth. I thought, well, I don't really want to spend like 6 days with this guy and just argue. And he was a big drinker. And so he's putting back the wines and just getting smashed. And so I just thought, well, obviously he doesn't really have a heart for God. If he did, he wouldn't be doing, living the way he is. And so I said, oh, how do you go through your translation? How do you translate, the Bible? And so they were updating the Pidgin Bible based on the United Bible Society text. And he said, well, what I did today is I just got the words, like say, in the beginning was the Word was with God. And so we just got the words and we jumbled them around. And we just had a look and said, does that make any more sense? Or is that better? Or, they're just jumbling words around. I just thought, oh my God, this is one of the main guys with the Pidgin Bible. But it's sad because, a lot of churches, they use that Bible. A lot of people walk around with that Bible, a lot of Christians. And so, but I thought it was funny. Here's Peter Gurry talking about the issue in Papua New Guinea, and they do want correct Bibles. One of the topics that I preached on. It was actually one of the last times I was there. I was street preaching, and I had about 300 people crowding around because a lot of people are interested in the gospel, and they're interested in what I've got to say in church history and things like that. And so I just said, look, guys, you've got to be careful about the Bible that you read. Sometimes you're reading the Bible and you've got to make sure it matches up with what they had in the Reformation period. We know Martin Luther, his Bible is a good Bible. We know that, Tyndale, he had his Bible. That's a good Bible. They're based on a good text called the Textus Receptus. The King James is the best one we have in English. And I was just sort of keeping it simple. I wasn't going into many details, but I was just sort of throw it in there. And then a guy from the audience asked me a question. And he said, so what about the Luther Bible? And he asked me a question. I can't remember what it was. And then so I answered that. Then someone else put their hand up, and it became a Q&A for probably about an hour about Bible versions. And I shifted gear and went right into it. And I went into the history of the Bible versions, went through the TR editions, and then went through what's happened with Westcott and Hort and how they've changed things and how the new Bibles have these missing words and redefinitions. And people were into it. It was I don't think I've ever seen people looking with as much enthusiasm. And I've been there 13 times over since 1997 was the first time I went up there. And people were very interested in that topic because every day when they go to church, they're reading a Bible. They're thinking, oh, is this a good Bible? There are others out there. What about the King James New Peller Testament? So anyway, interesting topic there. Okay, so Jeff has said you don't have to be a Calvinist to be on Word Magazine. Okay, so I won't get in trouble. I'm just going through these ones. Some folks are sensitive on that sort of thing. Smiles. So I'm just trying to keep up with these because these can be these can be issues that I've brought up before, and 20 minutes ago, and I'm trying to answer them. So this is obviously going back to the Trinity issue. On the Trinity, I'd recommend Matthew Barrett's book, Simply Trinity. Okay, I'll have a look at that. I've got James White's Trinity book, and it was interesting when we had the debate about whether Stephen Avery was a Trinitarian on the Textus Receptus Academy. There was just hundreds and hundreds of comments in these threads, and even Sam Shamoon jumped on and he was saying a bunch of stuff, and then he was saying it's okay to talk to Mary and stuff, and I was like, man, this is getting messy. So I actually created a different page called the Textus Receptus Academy debate group, where if anything like that happens, I just sort of throw it over there, and that was mostly because of that issue. But it was interesting that even people like Chris Thomas and a lot of confessional guys were saying that James White was a modalist, and he proves it in his Trinitarian book. I'm like, this is getting a bit full on for me. I'm sort of, I guess, I have studied issues on the Trinity, and one of the first books that I ever got was on the Trinity because I had the Jehovah's Witnesses come to my house about 100 times in the first year of my Christianity. But looking back, there probably was a little bit of modalism in there, because I guess it's, you got these triangle examples of, Jesus is the creator, the Father is the creator, the Holy Spirit's the creator. But then it will say something like in Isaiah, have we not one God? Has not one God created us? Or have we all not one Father? Has not one God created us? I think it's in Micah or Malachi or something. So there was like 30 examples, and I would use them constantly with these Jehovah's Witnesses. And so, yeah, the issue of the Trinity, very interesting, and I really want to go through a lot of that material, and yeah, it would be great to go through a lot of that stuff and to clearly define people's Trinitarian views. Because yeah, for me to hear someone from the confessional bibliology side say that James White is a modalist, it's like my head's just like going, okay, well, I really need to look into that a little bit more. And so Jeff said the Nicene Creed also, and so that's the one I'm pretty sure that Stephen rejects as a Nicene Creed. He got me to go through it. I couldn't agree with the eschatology of your Nicene Creed, and then at the end of the Nicene Creed, it said, "If you don't believe everything in this creed, you're a heretic." And I was like, "I've just damned myself because, my eschatology." Anyway, it was quite interesting. Tony Brown says, since Dr. Riddle is in the chat as well, have either of you compared Scribner's TR with the patriarchal text of the Orthodox Church and their remarkable correspondence? That's a really good question. It's interesting that they do have, 1 John 5:7 in the text there. And that probably goes back to the influence of Eugenius Vulgaris in his 1780 writings, where he talked about the grammatical hole that is in the text, or what's called a solecism, a Greek grammatical blunder that's in the text when you take the comma out. When you put the comma in, there's no blunder. It just reads very smoothly. If you take it out, there is a grammatical issue. And recently, I think probably about a year ago, I talked to Georgios Babiniotis, and Georgios, he is the leading Greek linguist, I guess you would give him that title. The leading living Greek linguist, and so he's written 200 books on Greek language, etymology, different types of Greek, Attic Greek, classical Greek, whatever. And he's written 6 dictionaries. And so I asked him about that question: is Eugenius Vulgaris correct with the comma? And he said he's not only correct, but verse 7 has to be there for verse 8 because of a syntactic parallelism. And so that goes back to, I guess, Noam Chomsky and his understanding of parallelism and syntactic parallelism. So it's quite interesting to go through and read what he said about that. If you go to johannine.com, it'll take you to articles that I put there. So, or if you just type in Georgios Babiniotis and 1 John 5:7, you'll probably get there. I should really have a link for that somewhere. So Jeff's answered, I have a hard time, a hard copy of the patriarchal text, and I have used online versions too. Yes, very close to TR. Even has the Comma Johanneum, so that's interesting. And it's pointed out Acts chapter 8, verse 37. So yeah, very interesting there. It would be good to make a comparison. I've got the text of Scrivener on my website, and many times I am putting in the patriarchal text, but I have a way that what I can do is I can copy and paste the Greek text into a page, and then paste, like say if I put the 1904 text into a page, then if I paste Scrivener's text into a page, if I look at the history of that, it shows me exactly where every change is. And so I could probably go through, Matthew and, you know, quite quickly, in a sense where I could probably do that in a few hours and show where there are differences in that text, which is quite interesting. And I've wanted to do that with a lot of texts, like say even New King James, MEV, where they depart from King James. Maybe I should just show you how I do this, tr.org.au. So this is the site. If you type in tr.org.au, you come to this page, textusreceptus.com. So this is my page. So if I go to a new page, just say I call it, I'll call it the 1904 Greek, blah, 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 whatever. And so I go. It'll take me to a page which is blank. Now, if I go to the 1904 Greek text, so I'll go to Bible Hub, say Matthew 1. And we go to the Greek. And so I can grab the Greek down here. Here we go, Greek Orthodox Church. So I can grab this text and I can throw it into my page and save it. And then I'll go back and grab Scrivener's text. Oops. And the thing is, many times we assume that these texts that are in digital format are correct. I've found, like, say, on the Bible Hub site, the text of Theodore Beza, the 1598 there, it actually says in Luke 2:22, their purification instead of her purification. And so it does have mistakes. So you can see what I've done there. I've just basically replaced that with the Scrivener text. Now, if I go to history and I go to last here, it shows me I'm not showing it. I just realized I'm not showing you guys anything. I have to go back to StreamYard. I won't be 1 second. I'm used to having the single screen, and so that's why it where are we? StreamYard. Okay. So this is the StreamYard format that I've got. It's really cool. Okay. That's better. Now I can show you guys what I'm doing. So what I did is I copied, that's the 1904 text, and that's the Scrivener text. And so you can see where it's changed. So obviously the final nu, you have Doid instead of David, but it's probably pronounced exactly the same. So most of these names, it's usually just spelling, or it might be smooth breathing, rough breathing issues. And so usually after verse 17, you'll have Decatesares. So you have a comma here on the Greek, on the 1904 text, where Scrivener has like the full stop there. Yeah, it's interesting. They have the Genesis with one nu. Here has the Genesis with two nus. So they would both be equivalent to birth. But so the Genesis with one nu is the same as Genesios in Matthew 1 here. So that's many times why it has the genealogy of Jesus, or the birth of Jesus, where Genesis with two nus is a lot different. And so that means birth, and this Genesis with one nu means more like the generation, and it's related to this. It's related more to like the history, or this is, it could be paraphrased. This is what Jesus Christ produced or generated. This is the book all about what Jesus Christ did. What he generated. He made the church. He died on the cross. He made disciples. He did all these things. And then it's got a full stop. Then it goes into the genealogy of Joseph, not Jesus. So that's why the genealogy of Jesus Christ. This isn't a genealogy of Jesus Christ. It's a genealogy of Joseph. And so it's a lot different. That's why the New King James and the King James have this distinct difference, because of the Genesis here with the extra nu. So that's interesting. You got the gar missing there. Agu, it's capitalized. Yithu, behold. It's just missing a comma there. So that would be interesting to actually go through and chat about the different editions of the TR, because I know that there are people out there who want to create like a new TR with footnotes and all the rest of it. I just don't think that there are many people who are up to speed with doing that, and also I don't think that every edition of the TR has been made available digitally. Like, so that 16 of Erasmus, and sometimes I go through and I check things and it's like, no, that's wrong. And so say the 1598 of Beza on Bible Hub, it's got mistakes in it. And so those issues all need to be cleaned up before anyone does any type of work. There's people like Mark Ward, there's people like Dwayne Green, and others who have. There's a bit of a crew who want to do a new sort of TR edition and have footnotes, and it's like, to me, they've got to really know this material and they've got to compare everything. But this is pretty cool that you can just go through and look at the red, you can compare it. It might just be a comma or a full stop or a question mark or something like that, capitalization. So I just thought I'd throw that in the mix there. Okay, I'm going to drag my StreamYard one back to here, and I'll put Erasmus's head back up there. Okay, so Stephen Hayes, Erasmus believed that Vaticanus might have been a recent translation from the Latin. It's hard to believe that he would have come to that conclusion without having studied it in some detail. Yeah, and in his 1535 edition, he does mention that, and he says that the text is a back translation from the Latin that was created at the Council of Florence. So I'm pretty sure that was like 1340 or something like that. And so, yeah, he was a conspiracy theorist and like saying that it was a modern day forgery. But it's interesting that John Mill, he has about 10 pages written about this issue. And yeah, it's quite interesting. He says that Vaticanus was a back translation from the Latin. So that's John Mill in 1707, the one that Bart Ehrman will bring up or other people will bring up as a critical text favorite. He didn't really like Vaticanus either. Tony Brown says, is there any validity to Erasmus's idea that Vaticanus was created at the Council of Florence? So yeah, really good question. And that would be a great thing to do a program on, some of the claims that Erasmus had made. And so it's not really well known. So I guess that's why, we're bringing this up here, because if it was well known, we would just point to a book or some scholar. But yeah, there is an article on the internet I pointed to last week, and I put out a whole bunch of caveats with it that I don't agree with everything these people say, but they bring up issues that I'd never really thought of or heard of before. And so it's hospitality. Here we are, the 5 myths of Erasmus's back translation. So I'll just throw that into the screen there. I'll make it nice and big for you guys. So if you go to christianhospitality.org, it will take you there. So basically, he talks about the comma and those issues. He talks about some of the anecdotes of Erasmus. Now, this is also available on the Confessional Bibliology page. Chris Thomas has got it there as a download. But yeah, very interesting. And so he talks about the Florentine. 1439, sorry. I said 1340, so I was out by 100 years. Erasmus claimed that when the Greek Orthodox Christians were admitted into the Latin communion at the Florentine Council of 1439, included in the Articles of Settlement was the stipulation of that their Greek Bibles had to be corrected to match the Latin Vulgate. So that's interesting. Sepultiva replied he had seen no such article that is in writing, and Erasmus countered that his information was from the highest source, that he had been given the information verbally by Bishop Cuthbert Tunstall of Durham, England, who had assured him that this was the case. I'm pretty sure that's Tunstall who persecuted Tyndale. So yeah, this is an interesting article. So, and he's got, where these came from. Now, I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a tip. If you go to pdfdrive.com, you type in Erasmus. Full PDFs, Erasmus's works, paraphrases on the epistles to Timothy, Praise of Folly, Beyond What Is Written, anything that's available on the internet. These guys have it in their PDF drive, and so you just click on it and download it. And yeah, I've got hard drives filled with books. I've just gone on a frenzy and just use up all my bandwidth to download these. Many years ago. A lot of people don't know you can do that, and so yeah. So if you go to pdfdrive.com, it's there, and if you go to christianhospitality.org or you Google for that and you type these in, you can get that information there, which is quite interesting. Okay, so I'm going to drag this StreamYard back to there, and I'll put Erasmus's head back up there. Okay. The paleo fundamentalist. Okay. Interesting. How did the patriarchal text get 1 John 5:7 and Acts chapter 8 verse 37 in it when these are so weakly supported in the Greek manuscript tradition? Well, that's a really good question. One of the things is we don't know what was available to the reformers. I'd say Erasmus, James White will say, he'll turn around and say, we know that Erasmus used 6 manuscripts. And then as time went on, he's like, well, Erasmus used between 6 and 12 manuscripts. Dan Wallace will say, Erasmus only had 5 manuscripts, and the King James Bible is based on 5 manuscripts. And it's like, they're just trying to throw dust in the air. And I heard Stephen Boyce say it was between 5 and 10 manuscripts. Then I heard James White say it was probably 20 manuscripts he had access to. So no one really knows. If they knew, they would just say, this is how many. Sometimes you go to articles about Erasmus and they'll have like 6 or 7 manuscripts there, and they'll say, well, definitely these are the ones that we know of. But the thing is, that's what he had at his hand. That's what he had in front of him. He was going through Europe, going to the libraries of Europe. He had open access to, people were privileged to have this guy come to the library and do things. And so he would go to a library, he would go through manuscripts, and he would go through the early church writings, go through Latin writings, and then he was writing down variants. And because I'll just get an article here on my page. So Erasmus, when they confiscated all of his works at one time, when he was going, I think it was into England. I think it's Life. Yeah. I just want to read this quote. It's quite interesting when you go through Erasmus's life and where he went. He spent 3 years in England. He spent 3 years in Rome. In fact, Erasmus's own manuscript collection was so large and valuable, it was covetously seized by customs when he left England to go to the continent to finalize the Greek New Testament in 1514. He protested, saying, they have stolen the labors of my life. So it's not just like he turned up to I've just got Stephen Avery just coming on now. I'll just finish what I'm saying, and then so I don't lose track. And so they'd stolen the labors of my life, and so this is proof that he had piles of variants. He had other things that he was looking at, and so I'll just let Stephen go. Hey, Steve.
Hello. I have an answer to that question, by the way, that you're on right now. When you're done.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. What I'll do, I'll finish answering this question. I'll just mute you there a little bit, and then I'll let you jump back on. And so, in answer to that, 1 John 5:7 and Acts 8:37, the issue is that the Greeks, they understood that there was a solecism there, and so sometimes the overriding influence of the internal evidence can usurp the majority text. So in a sense where we would say that the majority text reading in 1 John 5:7 is, that the comma shouldn't be there. But when you know Greek fluently, when you understand that it creates a grammatical hole there, uh, it's a bit like, in English, um, when we see grammatical errors, you might see someone say, they talk about, I've got an apple. If they said, I have a apple, there's an error there. And so the Greeks, they understand their language. Their language is inflected. They have a certain way that they understand that there is error in their text. And so they saw, especially with 1 John 5:7, there's a solecism there. And that was Eugenius Vulgaris. He proved that. And so that convinced the Greeks. See, the thing is also that it's in 95% of the Latin. And so the Greeks, the Greeks who did the 1904 edition, they would have looked at that as weight, as evidence, and understanding that in history this had dropped out of their manuscript tradition, but they wanted to put that back in because obviously it was readily available in the West, but also that the internal evidence was strong for that. And so I'll just let Stephen answer that as well.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Great question, and good evening. The people who complain about that, including Maurice Robinson and the text crits and everybody else, they hide one very basic fact. Even way before Vulgaris, the Orthodox had embraced those Reformation corrections to their Bible. At the Orthodox Confession of 1630 something, that might be Megillah, Joseph, Mogilla. I've got a page on this. There was Orthodox scholar after Orthodox scholar, again and again, they confirmed that the heavenly witnesses were scripture even before Eugenius really zeroed in on the solecism. They may or may, there had been a couple, Erasmus mentioned the solecism pretty intensely, actually. And Neo-Gurgis, the Lutheran, had mentioned it, but he sort of sloughed it off, but he mentioned it. So it was well known in the Orthodox circles that they had a gap in their manuscript. They didn't mind it being corrected. They were happy, Now, they might not have taken all of the corrections, but the big two, they clearly took. And when they talk about Antoniatus and try to say that he played games, he was under pressure from the hierarchy because all the Orthodox church doctrinal writers had supported the heavenly witnesses since about 1600. They don't tell you that. I have a page on it. Okay, I'm done.
That's really good. And I really appreciate the fact that you brought up that Erasmus knew about the grammatical issues. And I saw that you posted that on your Pure Bible forum and also on the TR Academy, because this just seems to be one of the neglected issues around the comma. And we can look at the work that, say, Elijah Hickson had done, with pointing out where the comma appears in the Greek. And so we might say, okay, it's only really in 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever manuscripts, and there's a few marginal issues. But one of the issues too is when I was doing my research into Revelation 16:5, and this was um, Jeff Riddle's discovery as well, was that we found that um, that Beza said that he had a manuscript for Revelation 16:5, with the reading of Isomenos in it. And so if you've read my book, obviously I'm saying that it is a form of nomina sacra because it is a noun phrase of the expanded name of Jehovah. And so it's a rare noun phrase that's usually in the Old Testament, but or a rare nomina sacra it's in the Old Testament. But when you go through Beza's annotations, he clearly said he had a manuscript. When you look at some of the translations, the English translations of Beza's annotations of around that time, of like 1610, and you'll see that they said clearly that Beza was saying that he had a manuscript. And so we don't know what that manuscript is. When I started to write my book, I don't think that manuscript was known for the last 200 years. People have said that it's a conjectural emendation. Jeff has clearly shown that it's not a conjectural emendation. I think my work has shown clearly that it's not a conjecture, and or specifically conjectural emendation. So we don't know what Beza used there. And when we're looking at Erasmus, when we're looking earlier, how do we know what these guys used? It's just a lot of guesswork, and so it's. I think that's the thing with the Reformation. A lot of people are just guessing of numbers. I mean, there's footprints there that show, certain things. Like when we're looking at Stephanus, he had a list. But even then, if you go through that list, there's usually 4 or 5 at the end that people can't decipher exactly which manuscripts he used. And so, yeah, just jump in anytime you want there, Stephen. I'll if you feel like you want to jump in, just jump in. I'm just going to throw some more comments up here.
I had to run and get a better plug, so I hope this one's better. So I missed a little bit from the Jeffrey Riddle, what he had pointed out, but let me just say this. The Heavenly Witnesses is not a weak spot in the TR. There are very few, it's a weak spot in Greek manuscripts, and it's a weak spot in versional support. But in overall support, it's extremely strong because it's got anti-Nicene Cyprian and Tertullian and hundredfold martyrs, which was in the apparatus, and it's got 400 bishops at the Council of Carthage. It's got Jerome saying that people were dropping it out, and they try to pretend it's not Jerome, but it's Jerome. It was dropping out of the text line deliberately by certain translators, scribes, etc. So overall, and then 95% of the Latin manuscripts, it's a different type of support, but where it is strong, it is one of the strongest verses. Acts 8:37 is similar in some ways, in the same type of support with Irenaeus and Cyprian, but the people who try to say that it's ridiculous and this and that, they simply don't know when you put the different pieces together, the internal evidences about the witness of God and the redundancy if you take it out, and the solecism being fixed by translating Latin to Greek, the anti-Nicene evidences, the ongoing church acceptance, the fact that the Trinity doctrine, whether you like it or not, would not have developed without 1 John 5:7. It really wouldn't have, not the way that it did. And that was shown by Forster. There are so many absolute, I don't like the word proofs, that much, but we can use it. I mean, these are proofs that it was in the early Greek. And like Walter Thiel said, Cyprian's Greek was Latin, probably came from the Greek. But it was it's a bridge too far for them, like Scrivener too, to say, oh, that means it's original. It's just a bridge too far because they've been duped by textual criticism, Greek onlyism, But really, I want to emphasize this. Anybody tells you that the evidence, now there are TR readings that have minimal support, and we sort of accept them by very solid arguments from Nick Sayers about Hallelujah and Revelation 16:5, where we accept them by faith that God providentially kept his word, and even if we don't see all the evidence, that we accept it as God's word in the logic of faith, as Edward Hill said. But believe me, the Heavenly Witnesses is not a weak reading at all. It's a powerful reading. It's sort of the turning point. It is the battle of the Bible in one verse. Don't let anybody ever make you start thinking, oh, I gotta be defensive about it. Oh, we don't have those Greek manuscripts. We don't have hardly anything until about 500 to 700 AD in Greek. And it was dropped out of the line, out of the Greek line, maybe by the Sabellian problem, that it looked too Sabellian, was probably a big factor, because Eusebius said 3 and 1 is Sabellian. Okay, he actually says that into Marquea of Ancella, I think it is. He says exactly that. So, you know, it might have started splitting early by homoiotoluton, but as soon as it was a split line, it was a doctrinal battle place, and the people could copy whichever one they want. And the Orthodox did not really like the Heavenly Witnesses, at least not in the Greek land, east, but in the west they did. So you got to sort of split, you know. But don't let anybody ever give you I'm just being emphatic about this snow job about, oh, there's no Greek manuscript, there's only 8. I'm being a little dramatic. Okay, it's all irrelevant. The overall evidence for the Heavenly Witnesses is dynamic, powerful, multifaceted. I don't like the word internal, but grammatical, internal, external, and you got to get that little mental thing out of your head. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, thanks, Stephen, and for the live drama there. So we've had James Snap. He's in the chat here, and so James Snap says, Stephen Hayes, Erasmus was provided with a list of readings from Vaticanus, and then he said, Tony Brown, is there any validity to Erasmus's idea that Vaticanus was created at the Council of Florence? And he answers that with no. James Snap says, Tony Brown, where does the Orthodox Church make such a claim exactly? And the Paleo Fundamentalist says, regarding Codex Vaticanus, the curator of the British Museum confessed it appeared to be a 15th century manuscript because of its good condition. Would be nice to test it scientifically. Okay.
Is that definitely Vaticanus? That might be, if it's the British Museum, he may have been talking about Sinaiticus. That might have been that fellow, I forgot his name. You might be mixing the two manuscripts up. Now, that Vaticanus could be late. It might be 10th century. It might, I don't know. I just want to say this about this. I tend to agree with Snap that Erasmus got bested in that discussion about Florence, in the original discussion. That's the impression I got. I went over this with one of the Dutch scholars, and he gave me and we discussed some of the resources. I'm not saying this definitely, but I don't think Erasmus really claimed that it was created then. And I think he had to backtrack a little bit. Now, I am very interested in whatever John Mills said. That's new to me. So if you can make that available, even if it's in Latin on TRA, I'll look at it. So I just want to say generally, there's no real evidence that Vaticanus is 4th century. It could be 6th. It could be a lot later. It was written twice. It looks washed out, according to Wieland. There's a lot of curiosities about it, but unless you really pin it down, I would not be too gung-ho about the Erasmus conversation about Florence, because I don't think it really came to any conclusion that Vaticanus was either created or modified at that point. Because when Vaticanus was overwritten, it does hide a couple of variants. They don't tell you that, but not many. The overriding of Vaticanus seemed to be pretty good, and did not allow it to change a lot of text. Okay, I'm gonna stop. Does that all make sense? Okay.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess what's interesting too is, and this has been brought up by Peter Gurry and a few other people, is that the Amulets in Codex Vaticanus, some people have said that if Codex Vaticanus is what the majority of scholars say is, 4th century, around 350 AD, and it has these amulets with the same ink as the original scribe, at 1 John 5:7, at many other places of textual variation, then that would prove that they knew of those readings of that era. And so it's quite an interesting topic to look into. I'm pretty sure James Snap's written about that a little bit. But it's just another, I guess, another rabbit trail to go down and to study. There's so many issues, even just around Erasmus. If you just get Erasmus, you get the anecdotes of Erasmus. You can spend months and months just going down rabbit holes of, the rush to print, Codex Montfortianus, Vaticanus, Council of Florence. There's so many issues surrounding Erasmus, and so I'm just going to throw up a few more chats here by James Snap. How about looking at the manuscript evidence for Acts chapter 9, verses 5 to 6, as presented in the KJV? And so, yeah, I've done study into that. The extent evidence in the Greek it's very hard to find, but the issue is, like I said about Revelation 16:5, the manuscript that Beza had, we don't know what that was. For the last 200 years, they haven't known what it is. And so we don't know what Erasmus used. We don't know what Beza used. And so what we have today, in World War II, there was 1 million biblical documents, biblical manuscripts in many different languages. 1 million were destroyed in the bombings in World War II. And so many of these, many things weren't put into categories. They weren't catalogued, and they've just dropped out of history. And so we can see that with just that issue of Revelation 16:5 with the manuscript that Theodore Beza said that he had. We don't know what it is, and so that's going back just over 400 years now. And so, say 420 years, 430 years, I guess. We can't tell what he used. We can't tell all the manuscripts that Erasmus used. And so the thing is, looking at the extant manuscripts of what we have today, I think Jeff Riddle points this out very successfully, is that how can we reconstruct the Bible today when we don't even have what they had in the Reformation? Many times it's almost brought out like we have all this new information today and all the rest of it, but I think we've actually lost a huge amount of information. We've lost a huge amount of manuscripts, and I think this is an issue that needs to be looked at as well. And so when we're looking at Acts chapter 9, verse 5 to 6, we need to go back into the shoes of the reformers and look at what they were saying about it, because if we're looking today, we might say, well, where's this reading today? And many times too, we've found, like, say when James White was going to debate Jeff Riddle on Ephesians chapter 3 verse 9, he was saying there's no manuscript evidence for it. But then once it sort of became publicly known there was going to be a debate about it, well, then we started finding this reading in manuscripts. And so that shows that the academics in Munster and other people who are looking at manuscripts, they're not doing a thorough job. And many times they're just making claims, oh, this reading isn't showing up in the TR. And it's not until it's brought right into the public arena that you've got a whole bunch of people looking and Googling, and things are being uploaded online. And then people are, actually, I just found it in this manuscript, or I found it here, I found it there. And so we've got to be careful of making dogmatic statements about what is available and what's not available when things are still being uploaded onto the internet. Things are still being copied and photographed, and so sometimes we act like we've got all the information, we've counted all the heads, and it equals this, but we've got to be careful of doing that. And so, yeah, so I think the curator, I think Paleo fundamentalist, that would probably be Sinaiticus, the one that the curator in the British Museum, where he's flipping through the pages, and it looked very. I used the word on the TR Academy, crisp. Well, here in Australia, we use that word sort of like, linen, crisp linen, like it's very flexible and very durable and fresh, sort of thing. Where it's not brittle.
He retracted that, I think, later when push came to shove and it was pointed out what he had said. I think he backtracked. He walked it back, circled back, like Pensaki and Biden. But he did say it at one point. If I could probably look it up. Scott McHenry is the. No, he wasn't talking about the reinforcement. It was a Sinaiticus quote. Well, no, James, you might be right. Let me say this. The reinforcement of Vaticanus was considered to be 1400s by the Catholics. The text crit scholars said it was 1000, 1100. Probably the Catholics were correct, I think, but that's only the reinforcement. So if we're talking about Vaticanus, there might be two different statements made. If we're talking about Vaticanus, it may be that the context was this overriding, the reinforcement. When was that? And of course, the textual critics make up dates by convenience. They don't really, often they don't do it. We saw that in Sinaiticus. They don't do any true paleography. They just sort of play around and put in whatever date they want. And I think that 1000, 1100 date for the reinforcement is an example of that. They had no real evidence for that, but it was convenient. And the guy, and McKendrick might have said it was 1500s. But again, there might be two different quotes, one on Vaticanus and one on Sinaiticus. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Stephen. And James Snap said, at least some of the amulets distigmi in Vaticanus are probably relatively, and I think it says late there, where he's just got an S for an A. And so, yeah, but I think there has been talk. I'm pretty sure it was the guy who really pointed it out in the 1990s, and I was following his blog, and he seems to say that it is in the original. It has been, obviously Vaticanus, they went back over it with certain inks, but then you can tell that underneath there is another ink, and that's in the original hand. And so, but yeah, that's an interesting topic. I'm only just sort of learning about that myself at the moment. So James Snap says Burgon in 1873 cited the existence of 620 Greek manuscripts of Mark. Today there are over 1,650 extant. So, yeah, and so like in a sense where I'm not saying like, but the thing is, from the Reformation time to Burgon, there could have been many manuscripts go missing, be destroyed. Obviously, with wars of religion, people want certain things to look certain ways. There's wars that happened in Germany, 30-year war. There's all sorts of things that have happened over history, and manuscripts being destroyed, Islam, and so I think the issue of, obviously today we have a lot of manuscripts, and I'm not saying pitting they had more or less or whatever. I'm just saying that they to say exactly what they had back in the Reformation, we can't say that with surety. We can't turn around and say Erasmus definitely had this reading, he definitely had this manuscript in front of him, or he definitely would have found this reading in this manuscript. We're just not sure. We're dealing with fragmented information, and that's only just going back 400 or 500 years. And so to me, for me and Jeff Riddle, plodding along, we've found that that Beza had a manuscript of Revelation 16:5, so it's no longer a conjectural emendation. That goes against the top scholarship of Nessel. Nessel in his 1598 edition. This is one of the main reasons why the United Bible Society left the TR. This is Revelation 16:5 was used as an issue for them to go with the critical text because of things like Revelation 16:5 claiming that it had no manuscript evidence whatsoever. And so here's Beza, the top scholar of his day, saying that he had a manuscript back then. So it's not even looked at, it's not even thought about. People don't know where this manuscript is. And so that's what I'm saying. Manuscript evidence. That's just me and Jeff Riddle plodding along. I'm a layman, Jeff's a pastor, and we've found that out. If we had, the budget that they have in Munster, if we had a team of scholars working under us, we could find out so much more. And so this is one of the things that I just find, that looking at extant evidence today, we can't judge what the Reformation did with what we have today, because, and the thing is too, the Byzantine text is usually just regulated to a BYZ, or it might have majority reading, or at the bottom of the apparatus of the critical text, and so most of the time they're cohesive. Most of the time they're in agreement with each other, and so the thing is, many times, Erasmus, the thing is, in the Middle Ages, the Byzantine guys were just sort of, it was like a rubber stamp. They were going through and just copying. Many of these are just in total agreement with each other. There might be a few issues here and there that happens with any type of handwritten manuscript. But the thing is, they're just rubber stamping something. So if there's a mistake there, just because you have 1,000 manuscripts with that mistake in it, just like with 1 John 5:7, it just gets rubber stamped. And so we understand, and even critical text people understand, that sometimes the majority reading, the Textus Receptus isn't just a majority text. It used to be called the majority text up until the majority text was printed in the 1980s. Then it sort of changed definition. But it was called the majority text, like the Greek Vulgate, and it had a whole bunch of other names, the Textus Receptus. But the TR, the genuine TR, is not based on the majority text. It has most of the time majority readings, but every now and then there are things like homoioteuton that can be recognized. There's solecisms that override what has been rubber stamped. And so, I think those things have to be taken into consideration. So I'll just throw some of James Snap's comments up here. How about the Greek evidence for her in Luke 2:22 and the KJV? Yeah, it's very interesting topic. I might just grab my my website up here, and I'll go straight to Luke 2:22.
The Greek evidence for Luke 2:22 is in a couple of early church writers. I'd have to double check which ones. There is some questions there, but it's basically an example like the Heavenly Witnesses. The corruption in the Greek line was very early, but the Latin line preserved the singular, and the singular has to be her purification. It can't, you got. That's where they trick you. They try to say, well, it's a singular. It might be his. Big deal. It's not. It's her. They knew all about the purification of Mary. They had festivals about it. So the big deception of the textual critics is to pretend that the Latin evidence is not overwhelmingly for her purification. and also some of the versional evidence too, but that gets complicated, and I'm a little rusty on that. But the Latin evidence is totally for her purification, and it's basically a simple situation. The Greek line corrupted by 3, 4, 500 AD and went to plural for whatever reason, and the Latin line preserved the true text. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And I guess the issue is with her purification. It's a bit like saying, on the eighth day, Mary went and got circumcised. You would just be like, hang on, that's wrong. The males get circumcised, not the females. And so all you have to really do with Luke 2:22 is go back to Leviticus chapter 12, verse 6 and 8. And it says here, and when the days of her purifying are fulfilled, for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring a lamb of the first year, a burnt offering, and a young pigeon and a turtle dove for a sin offering unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation unto the priest. Verse 7, who shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her. And she shall be cleansed from the issue of her blood. This is the law for her that hath borne a male or a female. And if she be not able to bring a lamb, then she shall bring 2 turtle doves and 2 young pigeons, the one for the burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. And the priest shall make an atonement for her, and she shall be. It doesn't mention the child, it doesn't mention the husband. And so Tatian's Diatessaron has that the child's mother should do her purification. The Proto-Evangelion of James has when the days of her purification were accomplished. And so when we look at the Septuagint, we can see the Aftes appears for her. And so this is the exact reading that we have in Luke. So this is the text of Beza here, Ophthes. And so we have it here. So it's the exact same Greek reading. It just means her purification. And so obviously, common sense has to come into play here, where the whole entire thing is talking about her purification. The woman does this, she does it. But then when we look at the difference here, we're only looking at 2 letters. And so what's more plausible, that 2 letters fell out of the transmission of the Greek text, or that all of a sudden men and women needed to be purified according to Leviticus chapter 12. All of a sudden, they all had to be purified like this, when clearly it just says the woman. And so to me, this is the internal evidence. This is looking back, and this is what Theodore Beza did quite frequently with his understanding of Greek, with his understanding of Hebrew through Tremellius, who was Jewish. Tremellius had written the first or the second Syriac Bible, and or translated the second Syriac Bible. Janius, he was the Arabic scholar. And so when you have the early Textus Receptus editions having their purification, they're mostly focused there on the Greek. But when you go outside of the closed class of witnesses of the early church writers, the Greek and the Latin, when you go outside of that and you look at other versional evidence, and you look at some of the quotations of the early church writers, you can see that clearly her purification was known. And also, like Cyril of Alexandria, she waits until the time of her purification. Aquinas, before her purification. So there's lots and lots of Jerome, when the days of her purification. There's lots of writings that show her purification, and it makes sense biblically. It doesn't create a contradiction in Scripture, because God is a God who cannot lie. He won't contradict himself. And this, to me, would be as strange as having, Mary, or imagine instead of Jesus getting circumcised the 8th day, it had they all got circumcised the 8th day. You would say, hang on, Mary wouldn't be circumcised. That's just bizarre. And so so that's one of the issues that I would bring up with that. And so I'll just throw you a comment here. If we're talking about something that Kendron or McKendrick, I think it's obvious that we weren't expecting their comments to remotely suggest that the manuscript is of recent publication. So that's talking about the issue with either Sinaiticus or Vaticanus. James Snap says, what readings in Erasmus compilations cannot be accounted for by a scenario in which Erasmus was consulting a handful of manuscripts at Basel? I think that the massive amount of variance that Erasmus was collecting when he was scouring all the libraries of Europe, he didn't spend 20 years doing that just to copy and paste it, from a manuscript into a text, into a printed edition. He was using his understanding of what many of the commentaries had said, what many of the Greek and Latin manuscripts had said, and the early church writings. He was using that understanding to guide his text and to make sure that he was um, making the manuscripts available into the most probable reading, and him understanding Greek fluently. He could spot solecisms. He knew when something was, say, for example, a noun phrase, say in Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, where even many modern scholars just say, oh, it's a solecism, Erasmus made a mistake. Where obviously Erasmus, he was very clear about that. And Homoi Teleuton, Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, he saw a book of life, and he checked with other manuscripts, and he clearly says he had other manuscripts. I know Delitzsch and Tregelles would say that he's a liar, and the last 6 verses are missing, and so how could he even comment on that? But obviously, they're either talking about a different manuscript or something else, because Erasmus clearly talks about those readings. He checked Greek manuscripts, plural, and so these are manuscripts no one knows about. Who knows what those manuscripts were that contain the reading Biblo in Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. It's just unknown to this generation of scholars. And people aren't really even looking into it, because they just have claimed that Erasmus was a liar and the last 6 verses are missing, and he only had one manuscript for Revelation. And so these are usually things that are put up. They're thrown out there, but and that usually stops inquiry, because people go, oh, Erasmus was just lying. And so um, I could think of one at least, so I'll just go back to that question. What readings in Erasmus's compilation cannot be accounted for by a scenario in which Erasmus was consulting? Okay, interesting question. I'll think about that. So Stephen Hayes says McKendrick didn't say he believed Vaticanus was produced in the 15th century, but said looked like it was. Okay. Okay, that's interesting. That we were assuming that we're talking about Sinaiticus mistakenly, but obviously we are talking about Vaticanus. So that would be an interesting thing to look up. I don't really know that much about McKendrick. James White has, well, Jerome was writing in Latin, and Augustine was writing Latin. Okay, so you're saying Greek evidence, where I guess when I'm talking about the early church writers, I guess just the fact that, I mean, to me, it's not really, it doesn't really matter whether they're speaking Greek or Latin, the church writers. To me, it's the overwhelming testimony that women got purified, not men. If it has their purification, it creates a massive contradiction. It means that the Jewish culture changed, that, I don't know, were they circumcising women then? But we could assume that the Jewish religion had changed to the point where they could do things like that, where roles had sort of been reversed and they all had to get purified, where clearly in Leviticus it's the woman, all the way through. And we look at the Septuagint, which, most critical text people believe is, especially when we look at the first 5 books, is a BC document. I would beg to differ, but it's clearly saying in Greek, it's the woman, aptes, and this is clearly in the context of Revelation. In Luke 2:22, when it's talking about aptes, here it's talking about, and the days of her purification according to the law of Moses. So this is according to the law of Moses there. So James Snaps says Erasmus had one Greek manuscript of Revelation on hand when making his first edition. But that's not true. If we actually go to Revelation, he clearly. I know that's a common that's a common thing that's said. But if we actually go down to, I'll just jump to Revelation. From there, I'll navigate down to verse 19. Whoops, Revelation 16. Clearly, Erasmus said that he had more than one Greek manuscript, and so I'm going to show you that. 1 second. Verse 19 here. I'll just make it nice and big. There we go. And if I jump to the bottom of this page, Revelation 22:16 to 21. Okay. So the sources, so everyone knows, minuscule 2814, the Reuchlins manuscript, which is a book of Revelation with a commentary of Andreas from Caesarea. And so people are saying, okay, that's the manuscript. But the problem is, when we go, okay, so I've got here Erasmus's Annotations. James White claims, so this is obviously in, James White was talking about this. Erasmus used only one manuscript of Revelation, but Erasmus said in Revelation 1:6, he said it is in the Greek copies, plural. So why does he say it's in the copies, in the plural, if he didn't mean that? And the thing is, it just seems like academia has just said he only used one manuscript and that's our script. We're not going to deviate from it, and we don't really care what Erasmus said about anything else. And he actually goes in depth explaining. So here it is in English. However, at the end of this book, I found some words in our versions which were lacking in the Greek copies, plural. And so in the Latin there, it's in the plural. But we added them from the Latin. And so he had them, they were lacking in the Greek copies, plural. And so when we look at just exactly what I just read, that appears in his first edition. But in the second edition, it's omitted. Third edition omitted. Fourth edition omitted. Fifth edition omitted. So it just doesn't appear in any edition after that. So in the first edition, it appears. He said, however, at the end of the book, and he clearly talks about what he did with Edward Lee. He said about Lee, he said, not content with that, he, Lee, accused me of an impious crime, that at the end of the book of Revelation, I added a small number of words in a Greek codex from our Latin copies. So what did Erasmus do? Or Erasmus, he had corrected the word when he was writing out the text of Reuchlin, and he had corrected the word from the Latin that he had there. and because he had other Greek copies that he was looking at, and so this is all information. This is very, it's by Eric Rummel. It's not conspiracy stuff. It's clearly stating that Erasmus had more than one manuscript for Revelation, and so I just find the whole narrative. He only had one manuscript, and then from that he had to correct the whole Book of Revelation from the Vulgate, and he went through and did that. I mean, Erasmus was saying they're accusing me of just of an impious crime, that at the end of the Book of Revelation I added a small number of words in a Greek codex from our Latin copies, and so um, Erasmus stood against the back translating and was disgusted to have been accused of it in his text. So it's quite interesting when you go through Erasmus's own words. He is clearly saying that he clearly mentions what he did and that he had Greek manuscripts, plural. And so this just goes against the academy. And this is just another anecdote against Erasmus. Erasmus there's just so many anecdotes about Erasmus and what he did and what he didn't do. And but on closer examination, you find that it really comes down to, is that Reuchlin manuscript, is that the actual one that was used by Erasmus? Now, I know Reuchlin most probably owned that, but perhaps he owned 4 or 5 editions of that. He was a collector. He collected those type of things. And so clearly the one that Erasmus used, he talks in detail about Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, where if it's missing from verse 16, how did he look at that? How did he correct Book of Life, and say it's in our Greek copies, plural? There's just so many things that people aren't looking at. They're just accepting what Delitzsch and Tregelles have said over the years, and it's like, oh, that solves it. It's a good story. Why let any facts get in the way of it? Erasmus is just a liar, and so I just don't gel with the whole thing that he had one Greek manuscript. I mean, he clearly says that he used the annotations of Lorenzo Valla, the Greek annotations of Lorenzo Valla. So we could talk about that a little bit more, but I'll just see what else has been said here. Helge says, advocating the TR can only be done on the basis of the providence of God in continuing the true New Testament text beyond the handwritten manuscripts into the printed text. Modern textual criticism cannot solve anything. And that's the issue as well. I mean, if people can't even get what the reformers had, they can't even figure out what they had at Revelation 16:5, and they keep parroting that it's a conjectural emendation when it's clearly been proven it hasn't. What hope have we got that they're reconstructing the text of 400? It just doesn't look good for them, for the Reconstructionist movement. Okay. Watching the clip, McKendrick was talking about Vaticanus. Okay, so thanks for that, Stephen. And sorry, our apologies to, who was it? It was just the Paleo Fundamentalist. I'm pretty sure he wrote that down. Yeah, so obviously he knew what he was talking about, and we sort of accused him of not, which sometimes is the case. We get people saying, oh, this and that, and they're actually talking about the wrong manuscript. But yeah, very interesting. We'll look into that, and we'll probably discuss that a little bit more next time. And so here we go. Whoops. Why did Erasmus refer to copies when he only had one copy? Easy. He yeasted the evidence to make his rhetoric more effective. So basically, Erasmus is a liar. And so this is what sort of gets me. It's like, okay, so to me, this is huge. Okay, so Erasmus, like Reuchlin, he could have easily have turned around and said, hang on. And so this is going back to Jan Kranz. I mean, Jan Kranz has been known to stretch the truth. I mean, so let's look at, say, what he says. Okay, so we've Delitzsch there. Scrivener, Hoskia, Edward Hills, Kudelek, James White, Jan Kranz. Okay, so Jan Kranz here. Okay, so this is interesting. Jan Kranz, he talks about Erasmus, and he says the style of this book is very simple, and its contents are mostly narrative, let alone the fact that its author has long since been unknown. Okay, so basically he's saying that Erasmus, his translation of Erasmus is that Erasmus is like, we don't know who wrote Revelation. Could have been John. It's just unknown who wrote it. And so, but when we look at Erika Rummel, so this is the 1980s, the language of this book is very simple and the content has mostly a historical sense, not to mention that the authorship was once unknown. And so here we have two leading scholars. One is saying that Erasmus was saying, oh, we don't know who the author is. The other one was saying that it was once uncertain, and that, but in Erasmus's day, it was certain that it was John. And so this shows the inconsistency between someone like Jan Kranz and someone like Erika Rummel. One of them's got to be right and one of them's got to be wrong. And so when you go through that, it's clearly talking about the translation of the Latin olim. And so I've got a bit of that on my website. And so olim means at that time, or some time ago, or once upon a time, once, formerly, of old. So obviously that fits with Erika Rummel. When you look at Jan Kranz, he has skewed that to make Erasmus look like he didn't really care who wrote Revelation. It's unknown. We don't know who wrote Revelation. And so he's translated it that way. So we see that these guys are doing that. These guys are skewing the facts, And so when we look at Erasmus, Erasmus is very clear, and he talks about details. So I mean, just to accuse the guy of lying, I mean, you've got to have a lot of evidence to prove that he's lying, because are there other places where you would just say, oh, Erasmus is just lying about the text here, especially when he could have been so openly exposed for lying? If he's prepared to, write, and this is one of the reasons Delitzsch and Tregelles, they've come out with their manuscript like, we've found the one that Erasmus used. Okay, and it's missing the last 6 verses. It's not just a few words in verse 19 that Erasmus talked about. No, it's missing 6 whole entire verses. And so how could Erasmus have written annotations on verse 19? He's a liar. And so it's just this Bart Ehrmanish type of thing where it's just like, okay, let's just one bit of evidence is throwing out the other, and it's instead of, let's examine these claims first. Let's have a look at this. Is this the exact same manuscript? How can we be sure? It's just been named as the manuscript, and then it's like, no, I only use one manuscript for Revelation, which is taken out of context of what Erasmus said. And so clearly he talked about Greek copies, plural. And so that has to be taken into consideration. I think the whole issue, Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, is it's just got so many holes in it and so many contradictions in it. And it just doesn't sit well with anyone doing historical research. Okay, so Nick, it's not necessary to say Erasmus was a liar, just that he made a false statement. I guess that comes down to the definition of what you would call a liar. If someone is saying that in Revelation 19, they looked at Greek copies, plural, if he didn't have them, he's a liar, because he didn't have anything else except for his one Greek manuscript. So he's saying he had more, so he's lying. Okay, so that comes down to the Bart Ehrman way of saying that is a lie a lie? And in his book Forged, where he talks about, you know, um, were the modern Christians, when they wrote a book that was favorable to Christianity, but it was written in the name of Thomas or whatever. It's like, is that a lie, or is it just are they just trying to help or whatever? I mean, Erasmus was clear. He had Greek manuscripts, and so he also said that he saw homoiouton in Revelation chapter 19. So that has to be a lie as well. And so that those things are just and that's only just the tip of the iceberg. That's just what I can see here, just having a cursory look. He would have had to have lied throughout the book of Revelation, where he said Greek copies say this. So even Scrivener said he rarely refers in his annotations to other manuscripts he had seen in the course of his travels. He says in Apocalypse 1:4 and in 8:13. So he's talking about Greek manuscripts, plural. And so he must be lying there as well, or stretching the truth, making a false statement. So he's just slipping on a banana peel. He's just making errors. He just doesn't really know what he's doing. Perhaps he thought it was Greek, but it wasn't. Or what do you say about that? He's either making huge statements here, or he's telling the truth. And I have no reason to think that Erasmus isn't telling the truth, even though he's a Roman Catholic. I don't sense that Erasmus was the type of person who would just bold-faced lie, especially with the amount of attention that he had, with the amount of people going over his work. It would seem strange that he would just come out and have such a huge bold-faced lie. Any of his printers could have held him to ransom over that. Any of his colleagues working in the print shop could have said, no, we didn't have any other Greek manuscripts. He's written it in the annotations. That never happened. Anyone really looking at the Reuchlin manuscript, Reuchlin himself, could have just turned around and just destroyed Erasmus's whole entire ministry. They wouldn't have had to have a whole, witch hunt at Validoid for Erasmus if he's a liar, if he can be proven as a liar. And so to me, it just doesn't sit well. And these things need to be restudied from a perspective where people are taking Erasmus at face value, and we're looking at Delitzsch and Tregelles and what they said, and we're seeing not whether they lied, but whether the information that they had is true. And so, okay, so I'll just jump onto this comment here. Nick, have you seen Jan Hernandez's analysis of the anomalous readings in Revelation in the TR? I think I have. That's on Academia. So I will just Jan Hernandez. So I'm just checking to see whether I've seen that one. Okay. Okay, Academia. Here we go. Okay, so he's done it on the comma. Okay, so I'll just type in Revelation. So there's 2. So I guess that would be it there, unless it's in another article. But I do remember seeing the name. Okay, it looks like a lot of really interesting material there. So I might have read it years ago, but I can't remember going through that. So I'll definitely download that and go through that. Okay, well, thanks for your input there, James Snap. So yeah, that's been a pretty lively chat there. And so one of the reasons why I've opened this up to just a general chat is yeah, it would be good to continually go through these issues. And we've brought up, like, say, Luke 2:22. Maybe this could even spark a debate about Luke 2:22. Maybe we could have, someone like James Snap or Elijah Hickson or Peter Gurry or whoever would want to debate that issue to come on, and we could do a formal debate. And it doesn't have to be with me either. It could be with Jeff Riddle or anyone. And so just to remind people, I'm going to be doing a debate on, I think it's the 22nd of this month. So that's going to be against CJ Cox, and this is to do with the King James Bible. So he's saying that we can sort of have any type of Bible or whatever. I think he actually is like KJV preferred. I would probably rather debate people who are critical text guys or even majority text guys, but yeah, I'm open to debate anyone. I've thrown that out quite a lot of times. I'll debate anyone on any verse, anywhere, anytime. Probably not any time. We have to work that out, but um, I'm open to doing debates with anyone. And so I'm just going to check a few comments here. Okay, so we've had quite a lot of interaction. We've had Jeff Riddle jump on, Stephen Avery, James Snap, Stephen Hayes. So we haven't really even started to go through what the Textus Receptus is. And so maybe for just a little while, I'll just talk a little bit more about Erasmus. But I really feel that because this is early days, I'm just sort of starting these things up. Whoever joins, and we just sort of go with the flow. But to have a little bit of guidance in the background, I'm just sort of talking about Textus Receptus and TR issues and mostly, the history of the TR. So that's how it's been advertised. But that's just so if no one shows up, it's not just a boring, live podcast, so I've actually got something to say in the background. But even then, mostly I haven't really got a script. I'm just sort of throwing things up on the screen and just chatting about it. And whatever comes to mind comes to mind. But it looks like there's a lot of heat around Luke 2:22, a lot of heat around the Council of Florence, Vaticanus, and also the last 6 verses of Revelation. Now, I think that would be a great one, perhaps to do next time. Now, next weekend I'm going to be in Melbourne, Victoria, and so I mightn't be able to do this, but I still might be able to, but I might have to change the time that I do it. Because we have a short period of time there, so I don't want to just spend my whole time doing this stuff where we're actually on a holiday for 3 days. And so but I do enjoy doing this, and I really appreciate you guys jumping on and sharing your stuff. And if anyone wants to join, I'll just show you here. So yeah, you just type in streamyard.com and then type those letters in, and you can join just like Stephen Avery did before. And so I mean, even if you, I guess, put a bit of blue tack over your camera, you don't have to show your face. You can just have your voice. If you wanted to join, that's all good. So we've got 2 more comments that have appeared here. Have you heard of the Bodleian Library? So I guess that's a question for me, the Bodleian Library. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that was founded around the same time as the King James Bible was commissioned. I think it was 1610 Bodleian Library appeared, and it has a whole bunch of really good info. I mean, that would be the sort of place which we would love to go to and look up manuscripts and and a lot of really key manuscripts are there. The Bodleian edition of the Bishop's Bible, which was the draft edition in English for the King James Version, Bod 1602. A lot of really important manuscripts are kept at the Bodleian Library, and so I'm not sure if that's a question to me or if that's just a general sort of shout out to people looking at the Bodleian Library. So James Snap says, Nick, not hate. Not at all. Just appeals to the evidence instead of just can't be. But appealing to the evidence. Okay, so what is the evidence? We have a manuscript by Reuchlin of that has the commentary of Andreas there. That's missing 6 verses at the end. And so that doesn't go with the testimony of what Erasmus had. And Erasmus wasn't operating like a lone wolf. He was talking openly about things in his annotations. He had printers who were around him. He had people working on the text. He had typesetters. He had all sorts of people who could easily go through and say, hang on, that manuscript had the last 6 verses missing. And even with Jan Kranz actually says that he most probably got someone to extract the biblical text from the commentary, because you had, sometimes you had a whole page of commentary with just 2 lines of biblical text. So they had to actually extract all that, put it into its own manuscript, and then that was used for the printers, so yeah, I think that sorry about that, I'll just bang my microphone there. So I think the whole issue with Erasmus just sort of, I'm not saying it's well, at the end of the day, people just aren't addressing these issues of Erasmus. I mean, it should be looked at. Is what Erasmus saying here true? It's just assumed because of Delitzsch that he's lying because of this manuscript that they've found. It just retroactively makes Erasmus into a liar, and to me, I just it just doesn't sit right. It's not forensically going through the evidence. It's just like, hey, look what I found over here. Look, it just proves Erasmus is a liar. Case closed. We need to abandon the TR. And that was a huge push for abandoning the TR of that era. And so I think there's motivation behind that. I think people were looking to look. People in that era were trying to find evidence against the TR. And so when they found something, they're like, look, we've found this, case closed against Erasmus. And it's almost like people haven't even considered the other side, and when you do, you just considered it a nut, a conspiracy nut, and that's not true scholarship. True scholarship would firstly put themselves in Erasmus's shoes and say, okay, is he lying? And what would be the motivations for him lying here? Well, what's the go? Because if he can just turn around and back translate from the Latin, why didn't he do that? 1 John 5:7 and just say, oh, yeah, I just back translated from Latin there. It's there's a whole bunch of anecdotes that tend to add up to Erasmus just being this bumbling fool or a liar, or no one takes him at face value that he was just a scholar doing his work. So that's what I'm saying. So James says, see Hoskia's collations for evidence of all Greek manuscripts of Revelation known at the time. And so, yeah, I've got that in front of me here. I'm pretty sure. I do have Hoskia's work on that page. Place. So Hoskia tends to believe that Erasmus only had one manuscript, and so I've read through Hoskia's material. So he's listed 3 minuscules with the Book of Life there. So when you look at that, but he does have quite a lot written about Delitzsch and Tischendorf. So people, for me, Hoskia, whether Hoskia had that information or not, I mean, for me, the whole thing about Delitzsch is that a whole generation of scholars have believed what they said, just like a whole generation of scholars believed that Revelation 16:5 was a conjectural imitation, and every scholar of this generation was wrong about that Revelation 16:5. And so it's taken a layman like me and a pastor like Jeff Riddle to show where that's been wrong. And that's just one issue, but just find time and time again, Ephesians 3:9. There's no manuscripts that back that up, and then when you look closely, oh no, it was Luke Carpenter, who at the time was like 18, I think. He found that. He's just a young guy, I think he was just a student. He found, Ephesians. There's manuscripts that have it, and so we found, I think, 3 manuscripts or something that had that reading, and so it went from 0 to, oh, we do have readings of that. When you check a lot of this information that's brought out by critical text guys, oftentimes there are errors in that, and I think I've shown that with the Revelation 16:5 material that I've had, that's caused Jan Kranz to amend his conjectures on the page in Munster. But he won't admit that Beza had a manuscript. He says, oh, he thought he had a manuscript, but he was reading something else, and it was just a mistake. It's like, how do you know that? So these are the top scholars, and then I've shown before that him and Rummel are at loggerheads whether Erasmus, thought that John wrote Revelation or not, and they'll translate things differently. And this is almost like, I remember when I was young, looking at Nostradamus, and everyone was like, oh, Nostradamus predicted this and predicted that. And I remember watching this Christian video on it. It was well done. And it was really the way that they translated the Latin, how they brought the Latin across. If it sounded like the Napoleon, there was a river near Nostradamus's house called the Neapold or something, but it sounded like Napoleon. So, oh, he predicted Napoleon. It just phonetically sounded like that from the Latin. So they said he predicted Hitler. He predicted all this other stuff, which he didn't. And so this is the thing. I believe Jan Kranz is deliberately mistranslating the Latin to make Erasmus look like he is a psycho, or not a psycho, to make it look like he doesn't think that John wrote Revelation. And so yeah, when we look at Hoskia's material, like Hoskia has his material here, and so I've got pictures of that. So that's from verse 16, and so that's just to prove. I'll just click that again so it's a bit clearer. So yeah, he has ea tamen ex Latinus, adjectimus scriptus Erasmus. So he's saying, okay, from the word David, from then on, it's back translated from the Latin. For me, even someone like Scrivener, I'm going through the 190 issues that he has with, or the 190 places where he changed his Textus Receptus from the text of Theodore Beza according to the King James Version. And I'm finding that some of them are just errors. Some of them are print errors. He should have known better. And for someone who's held up as a world-class scholar, his work is filled with errors, and I'm finding error after error after error. When you examine these things under the microscope, when you examine them closely, and so good scholar, but I mean him, Hoskia, great scholars, but they wouldn't hold a candle against someone like Beza or Erasmus or Stephanus. They wouldn't, or the King James translators. I mean, Hoskia, he actually summoned. He went to a clairvoyant to try to find the provenance of a scripture of a manuscript. Sorry, and I mean, who does that? No Christian. I don't know any Christian who would go to a clairvoyant to try and find out the providence of things. And so, while I think that his work is useful, I wouldn't necessarily agree with his conclusions. Even Dean John William Burgon, I don't agree with all his conclusions. I think many times, he says things that are wrong, as Scrivener does, and so I'm not tied to any of these guys. But I'm glad you pointed out to go to Hoskia. That's exactly where I've gone in my study on this, and I think I typed that out, or I found it somewhere online. I think I might have typed that out myself. And so, yeah. So anyway, I'll go to the next comment. Nick, again, 2814 has anomalies scattered throughout Revelation that correspond to Erasmus's printed text. Yeah, that could be true, but it just depends if that is the exact text. What it comes down to, either, and that would be evidence. So if we were to, have a court of law, we would put that as evidence for against Erasmus, on team one manuscript. But if we were to look at Erasmus's words in his generation, what people said about it, we would examine those things. And so the thing is too. Um, I guess it just depends also, because people say, oh, he only used one manuscript for Revelation, and then places where it diverts, well, he used the Latin Vulgate, where he never says that he does that. And so he said there was clearly homoioteuton in Revelation chapter 19, and there were a few words. I mean, 136 words isn't a few. There were 6 verses. There was a few words that were changed, and he understood from the Greek copies that he had that they were different, and so he amended it from the Latin. And so this isn't 6 verses that's missing, and so I think it's just a topic that people need to look more into. But yeah, good point. He 2814 has anomalies, but I would say, just straight off the cuff, that if there are, we have to find out how many of these commentaries of Andreas were written and how similar they are. Reuchlin could have had 3 or 4 of them in his collection. He's lent one to Erasmus, probably looked at one that's got 6 verses missing. He's like, oh, I won't give him that one. So he's given him another one, and Erasmus is able to use that in verse 19. There's a couple of words that are missing there, but on a whole, they would be very similar because they're a commentary, and so that wouldn't discredit uh, what Erasmus has said. It would just be like, well, 2814 matches up with another document. Whether we have that document today in history, or whether it's faded away in time, or whether it's sitting in a museum somewhere and no one's looked for it because Delitzsch has said case closed, that's for further study. Okay, so James Snap says Hernandez's essay mentions at least one of them. Okay, so I'll go through that. So that is this article here. So maybe I'll type in IUE Reuchlin? No. What would I say? Or maybe Erasmus. Okay, yeah. So he's definitely talking about Revelation 22. So a mediocre representative of the Andreas text. The transcription itself was a rash production and featured wording attested nowhere else in the Greek tradition. Okay, so yeah, he mentions Erasmus once in that article, the late text of Revelation, but it might be another article, so I'll check that. I'll check that out. Nick, there are 3 manuscripts you refer to simply handmade text copied by scribes, transcribing the printed Textus Receptus. Nick, are the 3 manuscripts you refer to? It could be, and so I do mention that in my article. So I'm only just going through this just because it's written information I've got there. If you slowly go through it, I do mention if there's anything written after the age of printing. And so let's have a look at the manuscripts. Okay, Erasmus's sources. So I was only reading what Hoskia said. So yeah, that could possibly be true because of the writing of Thomas Holland, I think it was. He seemed to think that Hoskia had mentioned other manuscripts. Yeah, Herman Hoskia listed 3 manuscripts of Book of Life there. So I wasn't mentioning that for any other reason. I was just reading quickly through that. Although 2 of the 4 known Greek witnesses could have been back translated. Yeah, so I've written about that. So I've made sure I put that information there. Okay. Hoskia's data is the point of the issue, not Hoskia's personal theological quirks. Yeah, and that's fine. But yeah, we're looking at the data, and so I guess having 6 verses is quite a big chunk. It's when you're dealing with one whole verse, that can be an effort in itself. A lot of the time, I'm only dealing with one word. Like say we look at Luke 2:22. But here I've attempted to put the TR editions side by side, and I've only got to like verse 17 or something with 1881, 1598, 1550, and then I've got Erasmus, and then the Complutensian Polyglot. And so going through exactly where there are changes and that way, and I'm checking all these myself. I'm not copying and pasting these from printed editions, digital editions, because many times they're flawed, and so that's taking quite a lot of time. But at the end, we'll be able to see. Yes, it's got like a print error there. That at the end, we'll be able to see clearly what matches and what doesn't, where there was a change, and sorry if I'm bouncing this page around, but yeah. So I've got the 1516 there. You can check it with the picture that I've got there, Colonaeus. So I've got that, the Stephanus, and so these are ones that I've looked at, gone through, and made sure that these are identical to what the pictures have, and then I'm putting them side by side so we can make a clear comparison. But you can already make a comparison, if you just have a bit of time just going through. But it's a lot easier when it's in a format like that. But that's just one of hundreds of projects I've got going. I get bored, and I'll go through all these, and then I'll get bored of it. And but I'm doing lots and lots of different things at the moment, and so but yeah. So when it comes to Hoskia's work, yeah, Hoskia did some great work, but wouldn't necessarily hold him higher than I do Scrivener or Burgon, or even at times Westcott and Hort on some issues. And so and so I do mention that they are printed editions of the TR that have been copied out. And so I'm sure that Hoskia writes more about this issue elsewhere. This is just in his concerning the text of the Apocalypse book. And so okay, so Hudson TD777 says, "Hi Nick, do you know about the Bodleian Library digitization project in 2012 of Greek manuscripts? 15th century printed books in Kun Abula and Hebrew manuscripts and early printed books." I wasn't specifically aware of those things. I've probably looked at a lot of Bodleian material. I guess when I'm searching for something, like say when I did my Revelation 16:5 material, I tried to look at everything, absolutely everything that I could find. And there were books that I found, say the commentaries of Hamo Halberd Stadensis. I'm pretty sure that's his name. When I found there was 27 of those editions, and so it was quite a popular book, and so that gave me a little bit of information that reading, was spread abroad. Because the thing is too, it's like you can say, okay, this was in one manuscript. Okay, where was that manuscript? Was it popular? If it's in a commentary and there's 1,000 of those commentaries floating around Europe, or 100 of them, or whatever, it shows that it was popular. It was used. People knew about that reading from that commentary, and so, but that's interesting that they've committed to doing that, and I think a lot of libraries are committed to doing that nowadays, and the e-rara material is really invaluable, and I've got a link on my page. If you go to books on my main page, oftentimes this links to scans of Luther, printed books, and etc. All these down here are usually e-rara that go to editions of the TR, and sometimes just books, archive.org. And so if you've got any links, throw them up there and I'll throw it in here. And so like sometimes the works of James Price, it's I've got Ant KJV. He was anti-KJV and TR. Jan Kransby on what he's written, just books that you can download here. And so if you've got any links to the Bodleian material, I can throw it up there, and that'll be great to look at. James Snap says, here's a link to Hernandez's essay. Okay, thanks for that. I think you're in YouTube, so I'll just jump into YouTube. Sure. Okay. Live, turn my sound off as soon as I can. Okay, so James Snap said he had to go. It didn't give the link to that essay, so I tried putting a link the other day in YouTube, and it wouldn't allow me. I guess people just put spammy stuff there. So anyway, I'll find that anyway. So I'll just search around. So Helge says, some would argue against the unity of the TR from the omission of Luke 1736 in Stephanus's 1550. This is a whole verse omitted in an influential TR, and the 1611 translators noted it in the margin. What I'm finding with a lot of the marginal notes in the 1611, they're actually there because if you put yourself in the shoes of the translators at that time, people were looking at, Bishop's Bible, Geneva Bible, Great Bible, Tyndale, or whatever. So if there was any huge difference, they would note it in the margin. And they also noted where there was issues with the Greek text. And so usually these sort of reflected each other anyway. Like, you would have a translation following the Greek text, but say somewhere like in Stephanus, Luke 1736. So that was noted and it's talked about, not because it's basically saying, okay, this is, if you guys out there probably all all the faculties out there know that the Stephanus text doesn't have this. So when you're reading through, you could think, oh, this is a print error. So to save everyone writing into us and saying, look, you guys, have added a verse or you've taken a verse out or whatever it happens, that they put that in the margin just to let people know that we're aware of that. And so, say like in Matthew chapter 1, verse 11, the name Jacob appears in the margin of the 1611. And so when you look at the Bishop's Bible, it's there. When you look at the Geneva Bible, it's there. But in the other Bibles, it's not. So they have, some say Jacob in the margin. It doesn't mean they're agreeing with it, disagreeing with it, whatever. They're just saying, look, some have this reading, especially if it's in the Bishops, because that was the one that they were to pattern themselves after. And so, so when it's talking about the unity of the TR, I'm not really that bothered um, by issues, being in this TR or outside that TR. To me, the King James translators were very superior to um, even Erasmus, because the thing was Erasmus was sort of pioneering, and when you're pioneering something like, say, like the example that I keep going back to is Revelation 16:5, because I sort of pioneered a work. So when I finished that book, there was people saying, "Oh, you should have added this, and you should have said this about Psalm 119. It's actually talking about that verse in there, and this and that." And there was a whole bunch of stuff, and it's like, I'm sure that happened with Erasmus. He did his work, and then everyone was like, "Oh, you should have done this," and so he's worked on that and done a second edition, third, and it's gone through. But to me, it's just from a progression from one technology to the next, and so you've got, and this is one of the most important things to understand about that era. And like I've said a few times, if the internet just started yesterday, and I threw up a King James edition, it could be the one that Scrivener did, the 1873, which he's amended a whole bunch of stuff, and it's got some different readings, and it's not an accurate KJV. It's still a KJV, but it's not 100% accurate. And so it could be that one, and that could sit online for 2 or 3 years, and then someone else goes, "Hang on, there's a mistake there," and they correct it, and then that gets copied and pasted around, and then someone eventually goes, "Oh, let's put up, what people would see as the definitive King James version, the 1900 Pure Cambridge edition," and so then they put that up, and it's finally. And so that's what I see with the TR editions and the earlier English editions. They were good. They're going through them, but it's like this little bit here, this little bit there. Um, it just they they were like tiny little um, specks, tiny little crumbs that got into the food, and so they've dug them out, and then by the time 1611 came around, they've nailed it, and they've gone, okay, that's a definitive Textus Receptus and also a definitive English Bible. And so yeah, so hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay, I'll just. James Snap had said, I think that's the one I'm thinking of at least. Okay. Luke 736, the AV has 36 verse wanting in most of the Greek copies, and so that's talking about in Stephanus, in the earlier editions. And so sometimes you got to understand the Greek copies is talking about the printed text, and so the work of Beza overrides the work of Stephanus, and so Stephanus did a good job, but Beza working still with his material, but with the influence of people like Calvin, with the influence of Henry Stephanus, Stephanus's son, and with Tremellius and Jenius. These guys had access to things that we still don't know that they had access to, and so that was convincing to them. It was convincing to the King James translators, and so but thanks for pointing that out. James Snap said he had to go. So Pure Bible has James Snap. Well, Jerome was writing in Latin. So I think that's going back to when James Snap was, because James Snap specifically asked what Greek evidence there is for Luke 2:22, and so obviously, there are places in the TR. See, this is the thing when people have a mindset that the TR has to be based on the majority text. No, it just so happens to be based on the majority text. So sometimes there are minority readings in the TR, and Jack Mormon, he wrote when he wrote a whole book on these minority readings, and so that has to be taken into consideration. With access to early Greek manuscripts. Yeah, well, that's a good point. And so Jerome, he wrote in Latin from the Greek, and so that's got to be. It's not just copied from the Latin. It's the Greek. So back to Luke 2:22. Stephen Hayes says, "I'm disturbed at Christians who simply refuse to allow internal evidence, such as consistency with the testimony of Scripture itself, to have preeminence." One of the things when I'm studying Luke 2:22, I just can't get around that whole thing. It's like like I said, I know it sounds disgusting, but it's like, would Mary just get circumcised all of a sudden? If it said Jesus went, he went to get circumcised, and they all got circumcised, including Mary and Joseph. It's like, well, and it says according to the law, so it's not. It's obviously her purification. I mean, it's only dealing with 2 letters here, and when you look at some of these manuscripts, the way that they're written, the style, and you're also talking about controversial figures within Scripture, to do with orthodoxy and to do with the Latin Church as well, and so you're looking at Mary. Mary's, if Mary and Jesus are, they both needed purifying. Well, they're on the same level. You know what I mean? And so, sometimes you go to these Orthodox churches, and I mean, there are so many statues of Mary. They're talking about Mary. Mary is the main figure, and so you can see that someone might have deliberately done that, or you could see that it's just dropped out, or 2 letters. But I wouldn't override the whole of Leviticus chapter 12 because of 2 letters. You know what I mean? Internal consistency makes a lot of difference. And this is the thing, people like Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, King James translators were fluent in Greek. They knew their craft, they knew what they were doing, and they could spot these things a mile away, and they could easily just go through the Old Testament and say, well, this contradicts the Old Testament, and so why have we got this reading there? And so okay, so we got Pure Bible. Stephen Avery says, my iPad ran out of ink and my Windows is wondering about sound. And so, yeah, that's fine. I saw you dropped out there, Stephen. But yeah, so that's the end of the comments. Actually, Pure Bible just said, Erdeshim tried to make their purification the Jews. Okay, that's interesting. I know that Codex Beza has the reading his purification, and so, but what I've discovered, and I've discovered this actually doing the translation into the Urdu Bible of Pakistan. Sometimes they're talking about a female, but it will say his or he went and he did this, and in the context it's talking about a female, but they don't have that extra word. And so when you're looking at Codex Beza, when it has his, to me it would probably speak to me that it was maybe translated from like a Syriac or something like that, where they don't have those type of distinctions. And so, okay. Stephen Hayes says the required offering in Leviticus 12 is a sin offering. Yeah, for Jesus, really? Exactly. And who wrote the law? Jesus did. God did, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit did. And so, as if he's going to just go, whoops, I contradicted myself there. He's God's out of time. He is looking at someone penning Leviticus 12 and me sitting here talking as if it's all the same day to him. He's that powerful. He can do that. And as if he's going to allow Luke to contradict himself, inspiring Luke to contradict himself. It's so strange. And so that this is the thing. I mean, you can count heads and, but people become majority text people. Critical text guys become majority text people when they come against the TR. So when you're looking at, 1 John 5:7, it's, oh, look at the Greek manuscripts, and they're all flustered about it. And it's like, look, they're favoring that the comma is not in there, and we're like, yeah, it's a minority reading in the Greek, but we understand that there is an overriding internal consistency issue here. And so the same as Luke 2:22. But then all of a sudden, when it comes to the last 12 verses of Mark, we're not talking about just a few words here or just a few letters or whatever. We're talking about 12 verses. Oh, straight in the bin with those verses. And it's like, well, okay, is that a majority text thing? No. 99.9% of all the manuscripts have it. In fact, only 2 don't. And it just shows you how much they favor Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. It's so people don't want to admit that they just basically just go with those, and they even like to cloak those terms in the oldest and best. The oldest and best manuscripts, like as if they've gone through all the oldest and best. No, a lot of the time, these oldest and best contradict each other on these issues. But when you're going through oldest and best material, wouldn't you go through the commentators? And like I pointed out in what was it, the Proto Evangelium, James, has the reading. There's a whole bunch of people who quote it. Her purification, isn't that older than Vaticanus and Sinaiticus claim to be? So, Erdeshim laughed at the normal attempts. Okay, so that's so Erdeshim tried to make their purification the Jews. Okay, yeah, so he wasn't into saying that it was Jesus, and so I guess there had to be a logical reason why even the Greeks would say, okay, well, we've got the reading their purification. It seems to be contradicting Leviticus. How do we get around that? And so, someone like Erdeshim, he's saying the purification could have been the Jews' purification there, and talking about the Jewish people. And so that's interesting. That's an interesting point. Stephen Hayes says, yeah, for Jesus, really. So I'll put that one there. We have, I would give the AV translators more weight on both textual and translational issues than I would all present day critics combined. Absolutely. I just find there are so many holes in what the critical text guys say. And they just don't seem to know that much. I mean, even someone who is the go-to guru like James White. I mean, once you sort of get past the fog of his, ad hom attacks upon people and all the rest of it, once you get through that, you go, hang on, he said that wrong. He said that wrong. And these guys aren't teachable. You show them, hang on, you're wrong here. This is a problem. Instead of going, oh, thanks for that, you know, they're just throwing dust in the air, and they're like, oh, you know you're a psycho. And I've had James White basically say that I'm a stalker, and because he came to Australia. um, Oftentimes our main city is Brisbane, and so he came to Brisbane. Like, we're in a country area, but Brisbane is just up the road. I used to street preach with the guys that he invited. Sorry, he got invited to Australia by guys who I used to street preach with regularly. I used to drive up there to preach the gospel. So for me to drive up and see James White, there's not a big deal. And I knew half the people in that church. And so he got on the dividing line and was like, oh, he's a stalker. Like, he went all the way out of his way to see me. And then he tried to give me his book, and I'm never going to read that book. And he's just not teachable. It's his way or the highway. Many of these guys won't look at new information. And many of these guys are so poisoned in a certain direction that they can't actually just go, okay, let's just look in the other direction. Let's put these other shoes on and look at it from a different angle. They can't do that. Where oftentimes I'm doing that with them. I'm like, okay, well, how will they view this? And I mean, a good education is knowing all the argumentation. How come people? Well, at least we give kudos to. I think Barry Hofstadter's passed away just recently, but at least him and James Snap have attempted to answer the whole thing with Eugenius Vulgaris. Other guys just don't even go there. It's like, oh, that doesn't exist, and they just point to these guys. Um, and that's the thing. The more that I study this, the more that I look at people involved with textual issues, text critics, I just find that their scholarship is wanting, and they they're making claims about themselves that they know languages and they know this fluently, and they can tell when, look at Bart Ehrman. He can tell when a guy is writing a manuscript and he just wanted to change it because he wanted to make Jesus look more godlike or whatever. And it's like, how does he know that? How does he get into the mind of these guys? And that's the thing. Once they're at the top of the hill, they feel that they can say anything. And we know that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we see that these guys have just become they've become their own authority. I remember when I was younger, you know, chick tracks were around quite a fair bit, and people would go. They would sort of laugh at the fact that Chick would have down the bottom as a reference, see this other book that he's written, sort of thing, instead of having a reference to this encyclopedia or whatever. It was just, look at this other chick track, sort of thing. And I know he was probably just doing that innocently, like, if you want further information, look there. But it's, people used to mock that. But it just seems like the academy are just like, oh, look at Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman, he's written this book on the Orthodox corruption, and he says this and he says that. So go to him. And Bart Ehrman's like, well, go to Bruce Metzger. And Bruce Metzger's like, well, go to this other guy. And it's just this echo chamber of text critics who, um, it, it's like, I mean, people are critical of Bart Ehrman, but they won't go the full way. They won't go the full hog of being critical of Sinaiticus, and that's the thing. They won't even go there. They won't even look at whether it's a modern day forgery or not. Where I'm like, okay, well, let's get some more evidence on this. Let's look at this, and other people have gone right into that. That would be a good show to do, actually, just specifically looking at the Sinaitic evidence. It'd be a good one to say announce, like, we're going to do that in a month's time. So then, because I really need to get all the books on that, read them, get up to speed with a lot of the argumentation, because when I was on the program of Josh Gibb, and it was Stephen Avery and James Snap, I was just sort of in the background, like, saying a few things here and there. But at the end of the day, if we're specifically talking about things, I need to be up to speed with that. Okay, I'm just going to jump down here. Okay, we've got quite a few comments here. Wow. Pure Bible. Stephen Avery says, right, the majority text position today is a shell of real TR acceptance. Yeah, and my understanding is that Dean John William Burgon and Hoskia, Mill, and at times Scrivener, these guys had enough bullets to sort of show the Westcott and Hort text concept was flawed, the critical text was flawed, especially Hoskia and Burgon, they were and Miller, but they weren't akin to Beza. They weren't akin to the King James translators, where they had enough bullets to show that things were wrong. I guess it's like, if you want someone who's a pure constitutionalist in the United States, you'd look at someone like Ron Paul or someone like that, where you might get Republicans in general sort of having libertarian concepts, but then they still are into American hegemony and other things, and having standing armies and all sorts of things, and so they're sort of contradicting. So that's the way I see, like, Burgon. He's not a pure TR guy. Yes, he had enough bullets to come against Westcott and Hort and did a very good job at times, but we really need to go back to people like Theodore Beza, Stephanus, and even Erasmus, but specifically the King James translators and what they had to say about things and decisions that they made. But when it comes to the majority text, to me, the traditional text label of Burgon became the majority text movement that happened with who is he? The guy who did this one here. Is it Jay? Jay Green. Yeah. So at the back of this book, this is 1976. He has a whole bunch of majority text readings, and then when you go through that, then it became sort of majority text movement, and then you had Farstad, Hodges, and then you got Pickering and Maurice Robinson, a whole bunch of guys involved with that. But the majority text movement is a new sort of thing. When you look at it historically, where are the Bibles based upon the majority text? That are, that's the Bible sort of thing. They're not around. It hasn't been, the majority text hasn't been, copied, and it's not like everyone's just got an edition of the majority text sitting on their desk who are interested in these sort of things. There might be a few geeks here and there who do, but at the end of the day, it's not really it's not the text. So people who are into providential preservation, they would see that this text has only just really sort of emerged of late. Where, like Stephen was saying earlier, the Textus Receptus was accepted by the Greeks, and so that's why the 1904 text is so close to the TR. And so the whole concept of the majority text that sort of has had dropped out, and then it's revised. And I think people like Burgon, he's trying to correct the TR. He's saying go back to the traditional text, and I think he did the first 14 chapters of Matthew, and he found like 114 issues that he wanted to change. And so he wasn't a TR guy, and he said that clearly. He said, "I'm not defending the Textus Receptus." And so, yeah, that's the puppy feet of the majority text movement that we see today. And to me also, the majority text movement is usually people who actually deep down want to be TR people, but they want to have their friends in the critical text camp, and they don't want to rock the boat. And so I've seen this quite a fair bit where people are like, well, I'm sort of like King James preferred, but I don't want to, be labeled by, James White on his show. So I'm sort of like, oh, I read these other ones, ESV's still good and this and that. And they're just sort of, sitting on the fence. And to me, it's just compromise. You're either in, you're out. That's either the reading is correct or it's not. And so do the homework, figure out where the word of God is, especially if you're going to be a leader or a pastor or someone who's bringing the word of God forward. You have to know where the words of God are, and to stand behind them, because especially when they're teaching that you shouldn't teach on variant readings and all the rest of it. Well, are you going to preach the last 12 verses of Mark? Are you going to preach the woman caught in adultery? Well, I am, because I've studied those things out, and I recognize the King James is 100% correct on those issues. And so and many others have as well. They've done their homework on that, and they're like, well, that's the word of God. But some majority text people are like, well, the Comiohanium, I'm not really going to go there. I'm just going to skip over that, and I don't want. It's not a hill I'm going to die on, and all this sort of stuff. And it's just compromise. You know what I mean? I mean, if Answers in Genesis can come out and say, if you don't really believe in a literal, creation account according to Genesis, chapter 1, if you don't think Genesis is literal and there was a literal flood and all that, it's going to skew the whole way you see the Bible. But the thing is, that's only just one section of the Bible. I mean, people place doubt over Isaiah 53. They place doubt on John, 7 and 8. They place doubt on 1 John 5. There's so many places where they're placing doubt on. To me, it's way more important, and it's not just to do with creation, young Earth creationism. This is to do with pretty much every doctrine, because you can't separate the words and the doctrines. The words and the doctrines go together. You get the doctrines from the words. So once you change the words, there's doctrinal implications there. So Stephen Hayes says, when Vaticanus and Sinaiticus agree, they go with Vaticanus. They only like Sinaiticus those occasions when it agrees with Vaticanus. Yeah, there's interesting studies on that, and sometimes like that, especially with Galilee. I did a study on this. I might actually even just quickly search for that. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I'm spelling that so wrong. Google will help me. Here we go. Okay, Galilee. Yeah, Luke 1:26. It's a classic. Okay, so maybe it's not Luke 1:26. Actually, I think I did this study for a debate, and I mightn't have put it online. Yeah, because it appears quite a few times there. Maybe it's Luke 2:4, where Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Oh, no, that's not it. Maybe that's it. No. Anyway, yeah. So basically, just to sum it up, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, they disagree with the word Galilee, but then later on, they both have, I think it's the word Galilee, or they have Judea or something like that, but it's the wrong place. And clearly, in the context, when you're reading through, it's like Jesus has gone all the way to this place, and then he's somewhere else, and it's like, how did he get there? Did he just transport? No, it doesn't say anything like that in the text. It's just an error. And so, yeah, sometimes Vaticanus will override. Vaticanus will override Sinaiticus, but when they're in agreement together, they override just common sense, Stephen Avery has, he rejected Jesus and Mary, the family, etc. So yeah, so that must just be a conversation that's occurring there in the chat. So Stephen said, and the early Vaticanus Batman misses books, so Sinaiticus Robin comes into play. Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, and so it's very interesting to go through some of the readings, and basically Vaticanus was just rejected by the Reformation, but it's been exalted as the best. So they've just turned everything upside down. So if you get what they're doing today and turn it back up the right way, you usually get the correct answer. So if they're saying Erasmus is a liar, this is one of the things you sort of can default to. If they're saying Erasmus is a liar, usually Erasmus is telling the truth. If they say Erasmus didn't have this many manuscripts, usually, or you had more manuscripts. If the King James translators didn't know the Granville Sharp rule, they probably knew the Granville Sharp rule really well. If the King James guys, they didn't know Greek properly, they were all interested in Latin. It's probably more so they were really interested in Greek, and Latin was just something that was, in the background. It's almost like the exact opposite, and that's what I do with a lot of things. Is there's claims made, and it's like, okay, let's just turn it on its head and let's just have a look at it that way. And sometimes that can help you get some decent answers and make sense of what these academics are saying. Not that everything they say is wrong, but it's usually the means they to get there. The way that they're saying things or the methodology that they're using. Stephen says that need for a sort of corroborating text that was probably behind Sinaiticus 1840 creation. So it'd be great to do a whole program on that. And so maybe I should announce a few different programs to do in a month's time. So, but something like Sinaiticus, I really need to. I've looked at all of what David Daniels had to say back in the day, but I guess I've forgotten a fair bit of that. I've got the book by David Daniels on Sinaiticus, but I really need to read the other books, and I really need to look at the contra material as well. Like I've read Elijah Hickson's contra stuff, but some of that was, I need to look at everything and then make an informed program. But then again, if I'm inviting people on who are experts on all sides, that would be an interesting topic as well. And so maybe we might even be able to get Elijah Hickson on, or I would give the AV translators more weight on both textual and translational issues. I think I've already put that one on there. Then I would all present-day critics combined, though they were not infallible, but better than modern critics. Yeah, absolutely. I think that was said earlier, but it's worth repeating. Vaticanus is really the critical text. Sinaiticus is only valuable occasionally when it can be said to support Vaticanus. Why don't they just print Vaticanus as their Bible with Apocrypha and all? Yeah, and that's the thing. Why aren't there a whole bunch of Bibles out there just based on Vaticanus? Why wasn't this seen or as the voice of the shepherd, or people just going, wow, let's just copy this text? It's because they read things in there and just were disgusted in it, as Erasmus was, as John Mill was, and the whole entire Reformation period looked at it and just went, it's not even worth looking at. Stephen Avery says James White conned Maurice Robinson into thinking he was actually considering the mark ending. Okay, that's interesting. That's really interesting, and I sort of see that a bit today. Hickson and Gurry seem to be saying, "Oh no, we're not really as definitive of throwing out the last 12 verses of Mark as we are, the Pericope Adultera. We definitely want to throw that out, but last 12 verses of Mark, no, we're not really that sure, And I noticed Stephen Boyce, he did a show with James Snap talking about that as well, and sort of saying umming and ahhing, and he was recently at a conference with Maurice Robinson, and so he's being influenced a little bit by that. But how, the thing is, these guys are coming to the table not with, okay, we've we've got answers for you guys. They're coming to the table going, we don't really know if these 12 verses are in or out. We're not sure. We have to just keep studying and writing books about it and thinking about it, and we're not sure. It's either in or it's out. Do the work, do the homework, do the study, and stand your ground. It's yeah, and the whole thing of Mark's ending is like, how much evidence do they need? It's like almost everything. So it shows you that they are not interested in majority text readings at all. They will just throw the whole lot, church fathers, everything in the bin, and just go Vaticanus Sinaiticus. It's bizarre. Stephen Avery said, true, the Hofstadter attempt had ups and downs, but ultimately failed. And so I guess that's talking back about the grammatical issues that occurred in 1 John 5, 7, and 8. That Hofstadter, at least he tried, and in James Snap, at least these guys have acknowledged those things. It's almost like people just go, they're Greek, and then that's it. There's no Latin. Latin just doesn't exist, apparently. And early church writings, they don't exist unless they're bolstering, critical text, argumentation. And so, okay, where am I now? Stephen Avery said, because he hinged it on verses that do not apply, masculine and feminine substantives. I said it the way Boyce said it. Substantives. And he was the expert on it. Yeah, absolutely. And so, wow. It'd be great to get maybe James Snap and someone like Hickson on board, and maybe we can get a few Greekies on board. Maybe it would be so good to get someone like Babiniotis and to do an interview with him. I'm not sure if he would, stoop down to this sort of level, in a sense where we hardly have any followers and all the rest of it. But it's like, it'd be great to get someone on that level to debate this. Maybe when I'm in Melbourne, I'll hunt up some Greek guys, because Melbourne has a huge Greek population down there, and so I'm going to be there next weekend. And I remember when I was buying some Greek books back in, I think it was in the 90s, I was in Brunswick Street, and I was talking to one of the guys there, and I said, I want to learn Greek. And he said, well, just get modern Greek, just learn that, don't worry with all this other stuff. It's just academic rubbish. And so he gave me a modern Greek book, and he said basically all the Greeks in the Orthodox Church in Melbourne all read the King James because it matches up with their text. And so it would be interesting because they would defend the comma, and so it'd be interesting if I can find some academics down there who would be willing to jump on this program and talk about the Greek and give us a good lesson in 1 John 5, 7 from a Greek perspective. That would be really cool. And so Stephen Hayes says, Pure Bible, spot on for why the Vatican financed the mission of Tischendorf to find Sinaiticus. Yes, it's so strange that he goes to the Pope. This, Protestant guy just goes to the Pope, and then, as you do. But I guess nowadays that's dime a dozen, Billy Graham and all these other apostates just hang around with the Pope. Okay, so we Helge. This is now the text received by all, approaching 400 years anniversary. Yeah, so that'll be the Elzevir's text, or 1524. So it wasn't mentioned until 1624. It wasn't mentioned until 1633. That it's the text received by all. So that was in their final, well, not their final edition, but their 15 1633 edition. Pure Bible says that was the long ago Erdeshim. Okay, so I guess Erdeshim might have fluctuated in and out of different opinions in his lifetime. Pure Bible says, I met with Maurice in person and he really thought that white might be changing. I laughed. Substances equals nouns. Okay. Snap was interested in the heavenly witnesses evidence about 7 years back, and then it became too hot to handle. It seems like that people go, they only go a certain way for so long, and then it becomes an issue where they're going to lose friends over it, or that they're getting hounded by the other side, and they just start attacking people who have made other decisions, and so. But at least Snap's gone that far. Most people don't go that far. Helge says, "Wow, Robinson, I had expected better of him, but James White is often deceptive, unfortunately." Yeah, I mean, you can see James White only just sort of being friendly with him, like when you look at James White, and when James Snap jumps on board and he's like, I'll debate you on anything. I'll debate you on the last 12 verses of Mark. I'll debate you on the Prickabate Ultra. He's like, no, I'd rather debate you on John chapter 6, on Calvinism. It's like, well, what are you talking about? Why would you want to not talk about these other issues? It's because he knows you'll lose big time. And James Snap will just walk all over him. And with both of those issues, and so James White, he's not silly. He knows if he's going to lose a debate, that's why he hasn't debated me yet on Revelation 16:5. He doesn't bring it up much anymore. And so but I guess it's a whole case of keep your friends close, your enemies closer. So that's where James White doesn't want to debate majority text people, especially when they're the same issues as what TR people are talking about, because he knows that someone like Maurice would just walk all over him, and someone like James Snap would walk all over him as well, and so he probably challenged Maurice Robinson to a debate on something really trivial rather than dealing with real issues. But that's James White for you. Okay, yes, 1633, a few years ahead still. So all right. Well, I've been going for 3 hours and a half nearly. So unless anyone's got anything pressing that they want to comment on, I might bail because I've got family coming for a big lunch. So my wife's cooking food at the moment, and it smells awesome. And I haven't had any breakfast yet, and it's nearly midday. But yeah, thanks guys for joining us. I think it's been really fruitful. I mean, how many quality conversations have we had here? We've had Stephen Hayes, we've had Jeff Riddle jump on, we've had Helge from Norway, we've had Tony Brown pop in, Paleo Fundamentalist, we've had James Snap, we've had Stephen Avery. If I haven't mentioned your name, it's not because I don't like you, but just because there's so many. And so it's great. It's been very good. I think it's been very fruitful. And I will work out what I'm going to do next time. And as I said, if I'm going to do a topic that's very in depth, I might I'll make everything up for it, but I'll put it a month in advance. So that way anyone who wants to jump on, they can study that for a month. Or obviously you're not going to study it every day for a month. Just refresh themselves on it, and then we can jump on and do a live thing on. It'd be great to do one on the Sinaiticus forgery issue. We've touched a bit on 1 John 5:7 already, but it'd be good to just specifically go through the grammar of 1 John 5:7 and get a few people involved, experts on that. Revelation, the last 6 verses of Revelation, that would be a good one. Maybe we can even convince Jan Kranz to come on and school us all, and we can ask a whole bunch of questions to him and say, well, what? But obviously, we can see even the shadows of the text critics in James Snap. He's saying, well, Erasmus is just sort of lying. Well, we don't call it lying; it's just stretching the truth, sort of thing. It's like, things just aren't adding up. Erasmus said a whole bunch of stuff that goes against Delitzsch there, and so, but yeah, if you've got any topics that you want me to do, just text me, throw it up here, wherever. And we'll try to get to it. I know a few people have talked about 1 Timothy 3:16. There's been a whole bunch of things. The Apocrypha. I'd probably prefer to stick to just TR issues rather than the broader, Apocrypha or just general bibliology. A lot of that stuff's answered by even critical text guys can have a good answer for that. But anyway, guys, God bless you. Have a good night, day, or morning, wherever you are. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.